After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li shook his head as his brows unfurrowed. Seeing as he couldn't find Fox 3 and the others, he would just have to explore this place by himself for now. After all, he was also very curious about these ruins. As far as he was aware, the mantra treasured axis and the mantra domain had both come out of true mantra sect, and neither of them were complete, so perhaps he could find their full versions in this place. Right as Han Li was about to set off, a thought suddenly occurred to him, and he swept a sleeve through the air to summon his profound heavenly gourd. A streak of golden light flew out of the gourd at his behest, and it was none other than the golden flag that he had captured earlier. He grabbed onto the flag before conducting a close inspection, and in doing so, he discovered that the flag was even more remarkable than he had first thought. The golden star designs on the flag were flashing like living creatures, and it felt as if they could fly out of the flag at any moment. Furthermore, he could sense tremendous time-law power fluctuations surging out of the flag, and they were even more formidable than the time-law power fluctuations in the golden lock given to him by Taoist Master Jingyang. This is also a graded, immortal treasure. A hint of elation flashed through Han Li's eyes at this realization, and he opened his mouth to release a burst of golden light, which enveloped the flag before sucking it into his body for refinement. At the moment, he was in an unknown and potentially dangerous place, so he had to elevate his own powers through any means possible. With that in mind, Han Li stowed his profound heavenly gourd away, then inspected his surroundings momentarily before flying away in a certain direction. Due to the limitations on his spiritual sense and eyesight, he was flying very slowly while also constantly scouring his surroundings with his spiritual sense and his infernal devilish eyes. Even though everything appeared to be peaceful and serene here, there was an indescribable sense of pressure in the air that kept him constantly on edge. Right at this moment, Moguang's voice suddenly rang out in his mind. Could it be that you've already entered the true mantra sect ruins, fellow Taoist Han? I heard about the true mantra sect back when I was with Ma Liang. You're on your own, right? Why don't you release me to help you out? You've come out of seclusion, Han Li asked, clearly rather taken aback to suddenly be hearing Moguang. After all these years of hard work, I've finally completely fused with his body, and I won't have to worry about falling out of the high zenith stage anymore, Moguang replied in a gleeful voice. Is that right? Congratulations, Han Li replied. Moguang seemed to be unable to suppress his own excitement, and he continued, Who would have thought that I would get to the high zenith stage before you, fellow Taoist Han? Han Li merely smiled in response, unbothered by Moguang's slightly boastful tone. Given his mastery of the laws of time, his power didn't correspond with his cultivation base at all. Even if Moguang were already at the mid-high zenith stage, he was confident in his own ability to deal with him. Moguang seemed to have realized that he had let his own excitement get the better of him, and he hurriedly added, Of course, given your exceptional aptitude, it won't be long before you also reach the high zenith stage, fellow Taoist Han. Even though you've successfully stabilized your cultivation base, I think it's best for you to keep consolidating in the flower branch domain, and I'll call upon you if I need you, Han Li said. These ruins seemed to be quite a strange place, and it was best to keep Moguang concealed as much as possible, given that he was currently in the body of a gray immortal. All right, Moguang sighed before falling silent, and Han Li continued to focus on scouring the surrounding environment. Close to a day passed by in the blink of an eye, and the surrounding environment hadn't changed much at all. At this point, Han Li was looking a little weary. Constantly maintaining his spiritual sense and his infernal devilish eyes was quite taxing on him, and he had only just taken a recovery pill when he suddenly stopped in his tracks. Something seemed to have caught his attention, and he drifted down onto the ground, right in front of an object buried in the ground. It appeared to be a large rock, but it was concealed under a thick layer of soil, so it was impossible to tell exactly what it was. Hanli swept a sleeve through the air to conjure up a whirlwind that was several dozen feet tall, and the whirlwind swept away the soil up ahead to reveal the large, blue rock underneath. It was a part of the remnants of a building, and it seemed to have been crafted out of some type of special stone material. Even after being buried here for countless years, it hadn't succumbed to erosion. A hint of elation appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he immediately continued onward. As he progressed onward, he noticed more and more vegetation. The area was no longer as barren as before, and he also spotted more and more fallen buildings. A short while later, he descended onto the ground once again. Up ahead was a massive palace that was several thousand feet in size and 200 to 300 feet tall, entirely constructed out of the same blue stone material. Back when it was fully intact, the palace would have undoubtedly been extremely majestic, but right now, it was severely ravaged, and a large section of it had collapsed altogether. The ground near the palace had also been torn to shreds, indicating that a fierce battle had taken place here at some point. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li released his spiritual sense to inspect the surrounding area, and some time later, he suddenly raised an eyebrow as he flew over to a large rock, then pushed it aside to reveal the skeletal remains of a body. The skeleton was wearing a white robe that had mostly succumbed to erosion, but Han Li was still able to tell that it was the same true mantra sect disciple attire that he had seen during his previous spiritual transmigration. He heaved a faint sigh at the sight of the body. He was using the true mantra sect's cultivation arts, so in a way, he was somewhat connected and indebted to this sect. He had heard about what the true mantra sect had been like during its heyday from Immortal Lord Hot Flame, and it was certainly a sobering sight to see such a powerful sect fall into ruin. Han Li quickly set aside that train of thought, then swept his spiritual sense over the body, but wasn't able to find any storage tools. He remained unfazed as he departed and continued to search through the rest of the palace. Before long, he had discovered several more bodies in true mantra sect attire, but their storage tools were also missing. It didn't take long before he had explored the entire palace, and he had nothing to show for it. He was rather disappointed by this, and he promptly departed, flying away as a streak of azure light. Shortly after he left the palace, his expression suddenly changed slightly as he stopped cold in his tracks, and he peered into the distance with his infernal devilish eyes while sweeping a sleeve through the air, releasing a burst of thick azure sword chi that struck the space up ahead. The space there rippled violently as a vast expanse of black light appeared, and the streak of azure sword chi instantly vanished upon contact, seemingly having been devoured by the black light. As for the black light itself, it rippled and squirmed slightly like a living creature before slowly fading away. Is that a spatial rift? The black light had been completely concealed in space and wasn't giving off any aura, so there was no way that he would have noticed it had it not been for the combination of his spiritual sense and his infernal devilish eyes. After a brief moment of contemplation, he swept a sleeve through the air once again, this time sending a thick arc of golden lightning crashing into the spot where the black light had just faded. The black light reappeared, and it was able to devour the arc of golden lightning with ease as well. A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he swept a sleeve through the air for a third time, releasing a crimson flying sword that rapidly swelled to over 100 feet in size before striking the black light. A dull thud rang out as the giant sword made contact with the black light, only for the former to be snapped in half in an instant. Han Li's heart jolted slightly upon seeing this. Thankfully, he had noticed the arc of black light ahead of time. Otherwise, If he had unwittingly flown into it, he would have definitely been severely injured, if not killed on the spot. With that in mind, Han Li picked up the two halves of the snapped sword, then skirted around the arc of black light as he continued onward. In the wake of that close call, he became even more cautious, and he didn't dare to withdraw his spiritual sense or infernal devilish eyes for even a moment. As he continued onward, more and more ruins appeared in his path, and all of them had been destroyed as collateral damage from previous battles. It didn't take long before another day passed by, and at this point, he was starting to grow a little disgruntled. The true mantra sect ruins had been destroyed to such an extent that he hadn't been able to find anything of use aside from several spirit medicines of a decent quality. This entire area was like a completely dead city. The terrain down below was still very flat, but some mountains had occasionally begun to appear. Han Li flew onward for a moment longer before his expression suddenly changed slightly. The ground up ahead had completely sunken downward to form a massive valley, and there were some palaces down in the valley that appeared to be relatively intact. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up as he flew down into the valley. The valley was enormous, and he was only able to see a small section of it with his spiritual sense and devilish eyes. The ground in the valley was quite flat and smooth, and there were white stone slabs that paved the earth as far as the eyes could see. It seemed that this had once been quite an important place. The valley wasn't spared from the ravages of battle, but the buildings here had been constructed using far better materials, so most of them were still relatively intact. A hint of excitement welled up in Han Li's heart upon seeing this, and he continued to scour his surroundings while venturing deeper into the valley. It didn't take long before he was quite deep into the valley, and there were many bodies laying here, belonging to both true mantra sect disciples and heavenly court cultivators. Based on what he had seen thus far, it appeared that there was a giant city in the valley, and the buildings that lined the streets he was walking along appeared to be shops. Prior to its destruction, this would have been quite a majestic city, and along the way, Han Li had found several decent materials. Upon arriving at the conclusion of a wide street, a huge plaza suddenly appeared ahead of him. Han Li quickly swept his gaze over the plaza, and something caught his attention. He rose up into the air, then flew over to a giant palace across from the plaza. This palace was far more massive than the other ones, and it had been constructed out of some type of translucent, dark blue crystalline material. There was a layer of faintly rippling blue light over its surface, giving it the appearance of a seabed crystal palace. Han Li was able to identify this blue crystalline material as sea blue crystal, a type of water attribute crystal that was renowned for its sturdiness. It wasn't exactly a premium material, but it was still quite precious, and constructing an entire palace out of it was a huge show of extravagance. However, he hadn't been drawn to the palace by its construction materials. Instead, he was intrigued by what was inside. It was very faint, but he could sense a burst of time law fluctuations deep within the palace. Perhaps it was because the palace had been entirely constructed from sea blue crystal, but it was almost perfectly preserved, despite the fact that all of the other palaces in the same area were displaying damage to different extents. Hanging above the entrance of the palace was a plaque that read Water Divination Palace, and Han Li was just about to step into the palace when his gaze was suddenly drawn to something by the entrance. It was a dark blue stone statue that had toppled to the ground. The statue was over 1,000 feet tall, and it depicted a strange child with a massive head and a disproportionately thin body. The base of the statue had been shattered, and as Han Li looked at the statue of the strange child, he was struck by a sense of familiarity, as if he had seen it before somewhere. All of a sudden, he recalled where he had seen the child before. Back when he was eavesdropping on Patriarch Myro's lecture through the translucent wall of light, there had been 5 figures seated around him, and one of them had been this strange child. Why is there a statue of him here? Does he have something to do with this water divination palace? After lingering at the entrance of the palace for a short while longer, Hanley cast that train of thought aside before stepping inside. As soon as he stepped into the palace, he immediately found himself in a rather dim setting with a subtle sense of pressure in the air. His brows furrowed slightly, but he continued onward. The palace was rather empty, with nothing inside with the exception of a few giant sea-blue crystal pillars. There were many signs of battle in here as well, and one of the stone pillars had even been severed altogether. Hanley swept his gaze across the palace, but didn't discover anything, so he continued onward, and it didn't take long before he had reached the palace's deepest point. There was a giant gate on the wall on either side of him, and beyond those gates were a pair of long black tunnels that extended as far as the eyes could see before vanishing into darkness. While Hanley was outside the palace, he had noticed many more palaces behind this one, and it seemed that this was quite a large cluster of buildings. Hanley could sense that the burst of time law fluctuations was situated somewhere to his right, so he immediately made his way into the tunnel on the right without any hesitation. The tunnel had been entirely constructed out of a type of black stone material, and it was giving off a cold aura. There were many signs of battle here as well, including countless gashes that had been sliced into the walls and a series of large cracks on the ground. However, these black walls were extremely sturdy and hadn't been completely destroyed. On top of that, there were also some bodies belonging to true mantra sect disciples or heavenly court cultivators littered throughout the tunnel, and perhaps it was because this was a rather isolated place, but the baleful chi here was quite dense, and there were gusts of yin wind sweeping through the air from up ahead. Hanley's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this. At the moment, he was struggling with his baleful decay, so he was naturally not fond of an environment like this one, but he wasn't going to turn back over such a trivial matter. The black tunnel was remarkably long, and even after walking for several minutes, Hanley still hadn't reached the end. However, the more he continued onward, the wider and taller the tunnel became. At the same time, the baleful chi in the air was also becoming denser and denser, stirring up some unrest in the baleful chi in his own body. Hanley hurriedly channeled his cultivation arts to protect himself and keep out the external baleful chi. After continuing onward for a while longer, his expression suddenly changed slightly as he stopped in his tracks. He could hear the sound of faint rumbling ringing out up ahead, and it seemed that a battle was taking place. After a brief moment of contemplation, he chanted an incantation to conjure up a dim light barrier that enveloped his entire body, then silently shot forward as a faint shadow. It didn't take long for him to reach the end of the tunnel, and a series of connected dark palaces appeared up ahead. All of the palaces were connected by passageways, resulting in a complex network of passageways. Hanley followed the sounds that he was hearing and passed through around a dozen palaces, upon which he discovered the source of the sounds in a giant palace that was tens of thousands of feet in size. There were a series of thick stone pillars standing in this palace, and all of them were riddled with countless runes. Most of these pillars had already collapsed to create a large, open area, and at this moment, there were 3 cultivators in that open area, locked in battle against 5 or 6 black shadows. The 3 cultivators consisted of a brawny man in a blue cloak, wielding an enormous blue sword, an elegant purple-robed woman with a veil over her face, and handsome red-robed man who seemed to be wearing some makeup on his face, giving him a rather effeminate appearance. The purple-robed woman had dense devilish chi swirling all around her, and it was clear that she was a being of the devil race. As for the red-robed man, Han Li was able to identify as Feng Qingyuan, the man that he had come across once back in the Leisure Valley, and he certainly wasn't expecting to see him again here. It seemed that the Heavenly Court had also had its sights set on the true Mantra sect ruins. But it was unclear to Han Li how they had managed to enter the ruins. The black shadows that the three of them were battling were some type of black humanoid creature that was several dozen feet tall. Their bodies were covered in black fur, giving the appearance of giant apes, and each of them also had a pair of dark red horns on their heads, as well as mouthfuls of fearsome-looking fangs. What are those things? To Han Li's surprise, these black ape-like creatures were quite formidable. Despite their enormous statures, they were able to move as swiftly as the wind, and their bodies were so resilient that they could directly clash against the immortal treasures of Feng Qingyuan's trio without sustaining any injuries. Occasional bursts of black flames erupted out of the black apes' mouths, and Feng Qingyuan's trio seemed to be quite apprehensive of these black flames, mostly choosing to evade them, rather than withstand them head-on. Even though Feng Qingyuan's trio was firmly on the back foot in this battle, they were clearly all seasoned combatants, and they remained calm and collected, managing to keep the ferocious assault from the black ape creatures at bay. Han Li only observed the battle for a short while before turning his gaze to the rest of the palace, but he didn't notice any treasures here. It seemed the three of them hadn't come here to pursue any treasures. Instead, they were simply unfortunate to have encountered these ape creatures. Seeing as there were no treasures here, Han Li naturally had no intention of revealing himself, yet right as he was about to slip away, a black beastly claw suddenly appeared behind him out of thin air before making a grab for his heart. Han Li's expression changed slightly as he shot forward like lightning, while hurriedly sweeping a sleeve through the air, releasing a streak of azure swordlight that appeared behind him in a flash before slashing toward the black claw. A resounding boom rang out as the streak of azure sword light was shattered, reverting back into an azure flying sword that tumbled back through the air. As for the black claw, a long gash had been slashed into it, one that had almost sliced the claw into two. A giant black ape creature then shot out of the darkness, before letting loose a furious roar in Han Li's direction. This ape creature was around twice the size of the others, and its entire body was riddled with a series of crimson patterns. There was also a cloud of black chi swirling around his body, hovering within which was a large black flag that was giving off the law-power fluctuations of an immortal treasure. Black light was rapidly flashing from the palm of the black ape creature's hand, drawing the surrounding baleful chi into its body, and the gash on its hand was fully healed in the blink of an eye. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes upon seeing this, and he summoned the azure bamboo cloud swarm sword back to himself before descending onto the ground. All of this had taken place in an instant, and Feng Qingyuan's trio was currently also staring at Han Li with surprised looks on their faces. The giant ape creature let loose a thunderous roar before pouncing at Han Li as a black shadow, and Han Li gave a cold harumph in response as he swept a sleeve through the air, releasing a thick arc of divine devilbane lightning toward the oncoming creature. All of the nearby baleful chi in the wake of the arc of golden lightning instantly disintegrated into nothingness, but the ape creature was completely unfazed as it opened its mouth to blast forth a burst of black flames. A resounding boom rang out as the lightning and flames clashed, and they began tearing at each other like a pair of worms, one golden and one black, with neither one able to get the better of the other. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, and he opened his mouth to release another azure flying sword, which pierced straight through the lightning and flames at an astonishing speed. A dull thump rang out as the black flames were scattered, while the azure flying sword continued onward, appearing in front of the giant ape creature in the blink of an eye before piercing directly toward it. The giant ape creature let loose a low roar, and the black flag above its head swooped down while giving off radiant black light, catching the oncoming azure flying sword like a giant black hand. A cold sneer appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he immediately made a hand seal, upon which the azure flying sword shuddered violently while releasing incredibly bright azure light alongside thick arcs of golden lightning. The black flag was instantly torn to shreds, while the azure flying sword continued onward without pause. A stunned and fearful look appeared on the giant ape creature's face, and all of the crimson patterns on its body lit up. Immediately thereafter, a pair of crimson wings of light appeared on its back, and it flapped those wings vigorously, darting to the side while leaving a trail of afterimages in its wake. A dull tearing sound rang out, and the giant ape creature reappeared several hundred feet away with a long and deep sword gash on its left shoulder. Its entire left arm had almost been severed, but no blood was flowing out of the wound, and the creature didn't seem to possess a body of flesh and blood. Han Li wasn't surprised to see this, and he casually raised a hand, upon which the azure flying sword instantly flew back to him, then split up into 3 smaller azure swords before flying back up his sleeve. At this moment, there was a furious look on the giant ape creature's face, but instead of pouncing at Han Li again, it opened its mouth up wide to release a relentless torrent of black flames toward him. The black flames encompassed an enormous area, making them seem impossible to evade. Han Li raised an eyebrow upon seeing this, and countless arcs of golden lightning erupted out of his body, then surged forth to form a wave of golden lightning that clashed against the wave of black fire. A string of earth-shattering booms rang out, and an impasse ensued, with neither side able to get the better of the other. The nearby stone pillars immediately began to shatter, sending loose rocks flying in all directions, while the entire palace trembled violently. However, the palace didn't collapse, perhaps because it possessed the innate structural integrity required to hold itself intact, or perhaps because there were fortifying restrictions set up within it. Right at this moment, Han Li made a hand seal, and he abruptly vanished from the spot amid a flash of golden lightning. The giant ape creature was quite alert, and it immediately spread its crimson wings to flee the scene upon seeing this. However, a cold harumph suddenly rang out in its mind, and a burst of extremely sharp spiritual sense speared into its consciousness, causing it to let loose an agonized roar while also rendering it temporarily immobile. Almost at the exact same moment, a large golden lock appeared beside it out of thin air, then locked onto its right arm. Boundless golden radiance erupted out of the golden lock, forming a giant golden rune that imprinted itself onto the ape creature's body, instantly rooting it to the spot. Immediately thereafter, Han Li appeared behind the ape creature amid a flash of golden lightning, then reached out and gently tapped 2 of his fingers against the back of the creature's head. A burst of piercing light that contained a silver flower design instantly vanished into the creature's head, splitting it into several pieces, but instead of falling apart, the pieces remained completely still. Han Li withdrew his fingers, then made a hand seal, and the giant golden rune on the ape creature's body instantly faded, while the golden lock also reverted back to roughly the size of the palm of his hand before falling into his grasp. Over the past years, he had already completely refined the lock, and it was just as powerful as he had hoped. As soon as the golden lock was removed, the ape creature's head instantly exploded into a vast expanse of baleful chi, and its headless body shuddered momentarily before also disintegrating into baleful chi, following which a black crystal came falling out. Han Li swept a sleeve through the air to release a burst of azure light that swept the black crystal into his grasp, upon which he discovered that it seemed to be the ape creature's core, and it was giving off incredibly formidable baleful chi. So that thing was an earth soul demon. Despite the demon in its name, Earth Soul demons were actually a type of ghostly creature that only had a chance of emerging in places with a high abundance of corpse-derived baleful chi. They were very adept at concealing themselves and were also quite intelligent, making them very dangerous to unsuspecting targets. Right at this moment, Moguang's voice rang out in Han Li's mind. "Give that crystal to me, fellow Taoist Han. It'll be very useful for my cultivation." Han Li took a glance at the black crystal, then flipped a hand over to stow it away into the flower branch domain. The other black ape creatures screeched in horror at the sight of their leader's demise, and they immediately turned and fled into the distance, quickly vanishing out of sight, while Feng Qingyuan's trio made no effort to stop them. The three of them stowed their immortal treasures away, then turned collectively to Han Li. "Thank you for slaying that Earth Soul ghost monarch and scaring away its minions, fellow Taoist. Otherwise, I don't know how much longer we would have been trapped here for," the brawny man said with a smile as he cupped his fist in a salute toward Han Li, and his two companions also expressed their gratitude. "You're far too kind, fellow Taoists. Given your powers, you could have easily defeated those ghostly creatures even without my help," Han Li replied with a faint smile. Even though all three of them had used secret techniques to conceal their cultivation bases, Han Li was able to tell that they were all at least at the late golden immortal stage. None of them had displayed their full power when dealing with those Earth Soul demons, and it seemed that they were more wary of each other than they had been of those creatures. "In any case, I should still thank you for your help," the brawny man said with a smile. Han Li gave a slight nod in response, and he appeared calm and collected on the surface, but internally, his mind was racing. He couldn't tell what the brawny man's affiliations were, but he knew that Feng Qingyuan most likely had ties to the heavenly court, while the purple-robed woman was clearly a devilish being. So why were the three of them seemingly traveling together in the true mantra sect ruins? Now that we've all run into each other, why don't we get to know one another and explore these ruins together? After all, no one knows what could be waiting for us up ahead, so it would surely be a good idea to band together and combine our powers, the brawny man proposed. "That's true. This is a very mysterious place, so it would indeed be a good idea for all of us to travel together," Han Li replied. The presence of these people in the true mantra sect ruins made Han Li feel as if there were some mysterious circumstances at play here. Even though the three of them were all quite formidable, Han Li was confident in his ability to handle them, and perhaps he could uncover some secrets by traveling with them. Feng Qingyuan and the purple-robed woman considered this offer briefly, before also nodding in agreement. "Great, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Ren Hao," the brawny man said as he cupped his fist in a salute toward Han Li's trio. "My name is Feng Jiangliu," Han Li declared, providing the name on the Heavenly Sand Sect token that Fox 3 had arranged for him. "I'm Yuan Feng," Feng Qingyuan said. "My name is Feng Lin," the purple-robed woman said with a smile. None of them knew if the names provided by the others were real or not, but with the self-introductions out of the way, the atmosphere had warmed up a little. Despite Ren Hao's imposing stature, he was surprisingly sociable and outgoing, and with him initiating some light-hearted conversation, the atmosphere lightened up even further. "How long have the three of you been in here? I only just got here, and it's been a real pain trying to navigate this place as my spiritual sense is severely restricted," Ren Hao said with a wry smile. "I only just got here as well, probably even later than the three of you, so I'm also still just trying to get my bearings," Han Li said. Feng Qingyuan and Feng Lin also offered similar responses, and it seemed none of them had any more information than the others. "In that case, let's keep going. This place is still relatively intact, so perhaps there are some treasures in here. Just make sure to be careful and not trigger any restrictions," Ren Hao cautioned, and Han Li's trio raised no objections. With that, the four of them continued onward, occasionally chatting with each other as they walked along, but still made sure to keep some distance between one another. Han Li was walking at the very rear of the group, inspecting his surroundings with a contemplative look on his face. He didn't know if Fox 3 and the others were aware of the devil race and heavenly court presence in these ruins. If they didn't, then that would be fine, but if they already knew but were intentionally keeping him in the dark, then he would have to tread with caution. With that in mind, Han Li was beginning to regret taking on this mission, but at this point he could only forge ahead. After passing through a few more palaces, the group finally emerged from the cluster of palaces, upon which they arrived in an open area at the foot of a hill. There was a wide and straight white jade path that led all the way up the hill, and at this point, Han Li could sense that the burst of time law power fluctuations had become quite potent, and that it was coming straight from ahead of the jade path. Given how pronounced the time law power fluctuations were, Ren Hao's trio had to have already sensed it as well, so he would have to think about how he was going to claim whatever it was that was at the end of the path. With that in mind, he took a subtle glance at the trio, and he was surprised to discover all three of them looking onward with a mixture of anticipation and apprehension in their eyes, but no sense of elation whatsoever. Han Li was rather surprised to see this. Judging from their reactions, it seemed like Feng Qingyuan's trio hadn't detected the time law power fluctuations at all. If they were merely acting, then this was an extremely convincing act that Han Li couldn't find any holes in. It looks like there are more buildings up ahead, but we haven't even explored the cluster of palaces that we just passed through. What do you all want to do? Should we keep going or return to those earlier palaces for future exploration? Ren Hao asked. Han Li's trio remained silent, but all of them cast their eyes directly forward. It looks like we're all on the same page. Onward we go, Ren Hao said with a smile. With that, the four of them continued onward in a single-row formation. The white jade path was quite wide, but it wasn't very long, and the four of them quickly reached its conclusion, where they arrived before a plaza that was over 10,000 feet in size on the mountain summit. The ground was paved with white jade slabs, and at the center of the plaza was another stone statue of the same child with the large head. This statue hadn't been damaged, and it seemed to have already been standing here for countless years. Han Li and the others took a glance at the statue, then quickly turned their attention to the front of the plaza. There were 5 smaller white jade paths that branched off in different directions from the plaza before fading into the white mist up ahead. There was a tall blue jade plaque next to each path, and they carried 5 place names: Disciple Meadow, 3 Water Pagoda, 5 Spirit Pavilion, Heaven-Bearing Palace, and Heavenly Medicine Valley. A contemplative look appeared in Han Li's eyes as he looked at the 5 place names. The Disciple Meadow and the Heavenly Medicine Valley were most likely where the true mantra sect disciples resided and where their spirit medicines were stored, respectively. However, the 3 Water Pagoda, the 5 Spirit Pavilion, and the Heaven-Bearing Palace didn't reveal much just based on their names alone. Ren Hao, Feng Qingyuan, and Feng Lin were also observing the 5 paths with hesitant expressions. Looks like we'll have to split up from here. Which paths are all of you planning to take? Ren Hao asked. Han Li turned his gaze to the second path, the one that was labeled 3 Water Pagoda. He could sense that this was where the time law power fluctuations were coming from. Before he had a chance to speak, Ren Hao suddenly said, "I'll choose this path. I'm using a water attribute cultivation art, so I should be able to find something useful at this 3 Water Pagoda." A hint of vexation flashed through Han Li's heart upon hearing this, but his expression remained unchanged. "I want to take a look at this Heavenly Medicine Valley. Hopefully, I'll be able to find some useful spirit medicines there," Feng Lin said. In that case, I'll go with the heaven-bearing palace. It sounds like an important place, so maybe I'll have some luck there, Feng Qingyuan said, then wasted no time as he promptly departed. Han Li remained silent as he made his way onto the third path, the one labeled Five Spirit Pavilion. All right, it looks like everyone has made a decision. This is where we part ways. I wish you all good fortune, Ren Hao said with a smile, then stepped onto the second path, quickly disappearing into the mist. Han Li's trio also quickly vanished into the white mist on their respective paths, and peace and quiet returned to the plaza. Moments later, an azure shadow shot back out of the third path, then descended onto the plaza, revealing itself to be Han Li. He took a quick glance at his surroundings, then flew down the path labeled Three Water Pagoda. Shortly thereafter, a figure emerged on the fourth path, and it was none other than Feng Qingyuan. He also immediately began making his way down the second path, without any hesitation. Mere moments later, Feng Lin also reappeared on the White Jade Plaza before taking the same path as everyone else. Han Li's aura was completely concealed as he made his way down the second path, and it didn't take long before he arrived in an open area, where a giant three-story pagoda was standing over 10,000 feet up ahead. The bottom level of the pagoda was octagonal in shape and constructed out of giant azure stone blocks that were riddled with tiny runes, and there was a huge arched entrance that was around 30 feet tall directly facing him. Han Li briefly inspected his surroundings, but wasn't able to find Ren Hao, and after ensuring that there was nothing amiss, he began making his way toward the pagoda. Upon reaching the arched entrance, he discovered that the black pagoda gates were opened inward, and there were some signs of damage on them, indicating that whatever restrictions that had been placed upon them had been destroyed. Instead of immediately entering the pagoda, he peered into its interior from the entrance, but all he could see was a faint layer of mist that was almost non-existent, but made it impossible to see what was inside. After a brief moment of contemplation, he stepped into the pagoda. As soon as he did so, he immediately felt as if the surrounding blue mist had suddenly become several times denser, and there was also an acrid stench in the air that caused his brows to furrow slightly. He looked down at his own feet, upon which he was astonished to discover that he was standing on a crimson sea of fire, and the acrid odor that he had just caught a whiff of had come from his burning boots and robes. This is another illusion. As soon as Han Li made this realization, he immediately channeled his spirit refinement technique. In the next instant, a cool and refreshing sensation permeated throughout his consciousness, restoring his clarity of mind. At the same time, the flames all over his body quickly faded until all that remained in the room was the same blue mist from before, which still refused to dissipate. Han Li activated his infernal devilish eyes, then quickly swept his gaze over the surrounding area, and the entire room was instantly made clear to him. The empty hall was severely ravaged, littered with destroyed stone pillars and chunks of wood, while the ground was caked in dried blood. Virtually, the entire hall was covered in a layer of bodies, all of which appeared to have suffered very horrific deaths. From the robes that still hadn't completely succumbed to erosion, Han Li could see that the bodies belonged to both true mantra sect disciples and heavenly court cultivators, indicating that a fierce battle had taken place here. On top of that, there were also many blue humanoid puppets interspersed among the bodies, but they had all been destroyed beyond repair. There were multiple partitions in the hall, and as Han Li made his way through the area, he saw more of the same, namely severely ravaged walls, bodies strewn everywhere, and the ground caked in dried blood. Upon reaching the deepest point of the hall, Han Li spotted a white jade staircase that led up to the second floor of the pagoda. There was an enormous sword that was still plunged into the staircase, but it was extremely severely eroded, and was nothing more than a huge piece of scrap metal. Piles of bodies were strewn around the sword, stacking up to several dozen feet tall, and after scanning the area, Han Li wasn't able to find anything useful, so he moved on to the second floor. As soon as he made his way onto the second floor, he was immediately struck by a bone-chilling sensation, and the immortal spiritual power in his body began to circulate on its own to protect him from the chill. It was as if he had entered a glacial space, and everything from the ground, the pillars, the walls, the window frames, and even the ceiling was all covered in a layer of blue ice crystals. For a moment, Han Li came under the impression that the second floor was even larger than the first one, but he then quickly realized that this only appeared to be the case, as the partitions on the first floor were absent from the second floor. However, just like on the first floor, the second floor was also littered with bodies belonging to true mantra sect and heavenly court cultivators, all of which had suffered horrific deaths. But the owners of these bodies clearly possessed superior cultivation bases back when they were alive, as evidenced by the fact that some of the bodies hadn't completely decayed yet. On top of that, Han Li also noticed many giant demon beast carcasses near the walls, but all of them were so severely damaged that it was impossible to tell what they had been. The baleful qi on the second floor was far denser than it was on the first floor, and Han Li made his way past the bodies in an expressionless manner, walking toward the staircase up ahead, which was also encased in ice. However, after walking only several hundred feet, his expression suddenly changed slightly as he looked down, only to discover that there is nothing on the icy floor aside from his own reflection. I clearly sensed something just now. Right at this moment, he suddenly raised an eyebrow as he noticed that an extremely exaggerated and gruesome smile had appeared on the face of his own reflection on the ground. In the same instant, he summoned an azure bamboo cloudswarm sword before plunging it firmly into the ground. However, his reflection was able to evade the sword's strike as if it were an agile fish in water, and it sprang out of the ice directly ahead of Han Li before plunging its hands directly toward his chest. At this point, Han Li's reflection no longer bore any resemblance to him. Its body was no different from that of a normal person, but its clothes were in tatters, and its face had decayed to the point that the bone underneath was clearly visible, giving it a zombie-like appearance. As it plunged its hands toward Han Li, its nails elongated to over a foot in length each, with dense baleful qi clinging to them. This is a corpse wraith. Han Li immediately withdrew his sword, then raised it in front of his own chest to defend himself. A loud clang rang out as a trail of sparks erupted from the blade of the sword, and Han Li was sent flying back by a burst of tremendous force. Corpse wraiths were entities that combined corpses and yin souls. They were undead creatures that could only arise after being trapped in places of immense baleful qi after tens of thousands of years, and they relish in devouring the flesh and blood of living beings. Corpse wraiths were already dead, so they couldn't be classified as living beings, and they couldn't enter the cycle of reincarnation, so they weren't ghosts either. Instead, they were liminal beings that belonged nowhere, and this particular one possessed high zenith stage power. However, Han Li could see from its eyes that it was still yet to attain intelligence, and that came as quite a relief. It was said that once a corpse wraith devoured sufficient blood and flesh, it would be able to attain intelligence, thereby making it a far more formidable foe to deal with, often possessing far superior power to living cultivators of the same caliber. This corpse wraith had most likely been trapped here its entire existence, thereby robbing it of any opportunity to come into contact with living beings, and that was why it hadn't attained intelligence. It was also because of this that Han Li wasn't fleeing the scene right away. If another late golden immortal cultivator had been in Han Li's place, they would have most likely already fallen prey to that initial sneak attack. All of a sudden, the corpse wraith vanished from the spot, Han Li's pupils contracted slightly upon seeing this, and he immediately launched himself backward in retreat. Almost in the exact same instant, the corpse wraith reappeared where he had been standing just a moment ago, and its hands pierced straight through a stone pillar, shattering it into countless pieces. While still darting back in retreat, Han Li chanted a silent incantation, and a ball of golden light instantly erupted out of his body, forming a golden light barrier that encompassed the entirety of the second floor. As soon as the time spirit domain was conjured up, everything on the second floor instantly slowed down. Han Li turned to discover the high zenith stage corpse wraith charging toward him while leaving a trail of afterimages in its wake, displaying tremendous speed even within the time spirit domain. Han Li swiveled around before piercing the azure bamboo cloudswarm sword in his hand, directly toward the corpse wraith, and a resounding clang rang out as the sword forcibly parted the corpse wraith's ghostly claws before piercing straight into its chest. However, the corpse wraith's physical constitution was far more formidable than Han Li anticipated, and the sword was only able to scratch several white marks onto its chest, but was unable to harm it in the slightest. Meanwhile, the corpse wraith had already withdrawn its hands, and its sharp fingernails elongated even further before piercing through the air toward Han Li's neck from both directions. Han Li thrust the palm of his hand against the base of the azure bamboo cloudswarm sword's hilt, and it immediately began piercing into the corpse wraith's chest with renewed power, while also releasing arcs of divine devilbane lightning. The corpse wraith howled like a wounded animal as its entire body stiffened before toppling backward. Its chest had been completely charred black, and there were plumes of nauseating black smoke rising up from the wound. Han Li instantly darted over to the corpse wraith, aiming to deal the finishing blow before it had a chance to get back up, but all of a sudden, a burst of purple light flashed through the corpse wraith's eyes, and its body disintegrated into a plume of smoke right before Han Li was able to land his attack. Han Li's heart jolted slightly upon seeing this, and he hurriedly darted back in retreat. Right at this moment, the corpse wraith's body reverted back to a substantial form, and it reappeared right behind Han Li before thrusting its claws toward the back of his chest. Thankfully, its speed was significantly hampered by the time spirit domain, so Han Li was able to easily evade the attack before swiveling around and slashing his sword toward his assailant. Dozens of arcs of golden lightning sprang out of the sword, then intertwined with each other to form a golden lightning net, which cut off all possible avenues of retreat for the corpse wraith. A loud, metallic clang rang out as the sword struck the corpse wraith on the head, and its entire body was inundated by golden lightning. Countless arcs of golden lightning sprang forth in all directions as plumes of black smoke rose up incessantly. The corpse wraith howled in agony as its body was being rapidly charred black, but its aura didn't weaken in the slightest, so it was clear that this wasn't going to be anywhere near enough to kill it. Right as Han Li was about to summon a few more azure bamboo cloudswarm swords to help his cause, the corpse wraith's body disintegrated once again before fleeing into the icy ground. Plumes of dense, black baleful chi began to converge from all directions beneath the layer of ice, then surged into the corpse wraith's body in a frenzy. As a result, all of the injuries that the corpse wraith had sustained from Han Li's divine devilbane lightning were quickly healed. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he took a step forward, then abruptly vanished from the spot. In the next instant, he appeared directly above the corpse wraith, then swung his sword upon its head. A resounding boom rang out as the ice on the ground exploded, and the corpse wraith darted out like a slippery eel, taking on a substantial form once again as it pounced at Han Li. Han Li raised his sword to keep at bay, but it completely disregarded the divine devilbane lightning as it grabbed onto the sword with both hands, then opened its mouth up wide and let loose a shrill shriek. A sense of foreboding welled up in Han Li's heart upon seeing this, and he immediately held his breath while also cutting off his five senses, but he had reacted just a split second too late. A plume of dark purple corpse baleful chi shot forth like an arrow before striking him in the face, instantly causing his face to go numb. Immediately thereafter, he felt a burst of burning pain in his throat and airways, and his eyes also became extremely sore and dry, causing his vision to blur. He gritted his teeth against the discomfort as he injected his immortal spiritual power into his azure bamboo cloudswarm sword, unleashing a powerful eruption of divine devilbane lightning to force back the corpse wraith. At the same time, he darted back in retreat before moving back and forth throughout the hall, ensuring that he was constantly in motion. The corpse wraith immediately pounced at him once again, pursuing him intently as it attempted to tear him to shreds. At this moment, Han Li's five senses were sealed, so he could only track the corpse wraith with his spiritual sense while continuing to take evasive measures. Somehow, despite the effects of the time-spirit domain, the corpse wraith was becoming faster and faster, and before long, it had managed to tear several gashes into Han Li's robes. Right at this moment, the corpse wraith suddenly split up into five identical figures. All of a sudden, Han Li could detect five identical auras in his spiritual sense, and his brows immediately furrowed slightly. His eyes has been infiltrated by corpse baleful chi, so he was unable to use his infernal devilish eyes to determine which of the five figures was the real corpse wraith. The five corpse wraiths formed an encirclement around Han Li before darting at him in unison, and all of them had their claws aimed at different vital regions on his body. Regardless of which direction Han Li chose to flee in, he would inevitably be intercepted by one of the corpse wraiths, following which the others would also get to him. In this dire situation, a burst of radiant golden light abruptly erupted out of his body, and the five corpse wraiths were instantly rooted to the spot roughly 10 feet away from Han Li as the golden light washed over them. At the same time, Han Li opened his mouth, and a cloud of corpse baleful chi erupted out of his mouth before slamming into the ground, where it exploded. The purple mist on his face immediately faded, and bright purple light appeared in his eyes as he cast his gaze toward the five surrounding corpse wraiths. In doing so, he discovered that one of the corpse wraiths had several times the amount of baleful chi in its body compared with the others, and he immediately aimed the tip of his azure bamboo cloudswarm sword at that corpse wraith's dantian. A ball of golden lightning then quickly took shape at the tip of the sword before being launched through the air, and a thick pillar of golden lightning emerged, instantly inundating the corpse wraith's entire body. The entire blue hall shuddered violently, and the four other corpse wraiths disintegrated in rapid succession, leaving only the corpse wraith that had been struck by Han Li's lightning-wheeled technique, still suspended in midair from the effects of the true mantra axis. What a pain in the backside! Han Li's brows furrowed tightly as he watched the corpse wraith re-emerge, while the lightning faded. The corpse wraith didn't possess any intelligence, but its physical constitution wasn't inferior to that of a high zenith stage jade immortal, and Han Li's lightning-wheeled technique had inflicted severe injuries upon it, but wasn't enough to kill it. Given the current circumstances, he couldn't afford to waste much time here. Right as he was considering summoning the azure bamboo cloudswarm sword that had been nurtured for the longest time in his profound heavenly gourd, or releasing the essence fire raven to incinerate the corpse wraith, Moguang's voice suddenly rang out in his mind. Fellow Taoist Han, while it's true that this thing possesses similar attributes to ghostly creatures, its high cultivation base grants it some resistance against lightning and fire attribute attacks, so it won't be easy for you to take it down. How about you leave it to me instead? You have a way to kill this thing, Han Li asked. Indeed. I just so happen to know where its fatal weaknesses are, and if you leave it to me, I can kill it in a very short time, Moguang replied. Han Li considered Moguang's proposal for a moment, following which a floral design appeared on the middle and index fingers of his right hand. A door of light that was around 10 feet tall then appeared beside him, and at the same time, Han Li swept his left hand through the air, stowing his mantra treasured axis away up his sleeve. With the mantra treasured axis gone, the corpse wraith instantly regained its mobility, and it continued to charge forward, aiming directly at Han Li's glabella. Right at this moment, a black figure shot out of the door of silver light, and it appeared before the corpse wraith in a flash, then reached out with one hand. There was baleful chi swirling around the hand, and it was thrust straight through the point where the corpse wraith's chest and abdomen were connected. The black figure was none other than Moguang, and at this moment, his hand was protruding out of the other side of the corpse wraith's body with a fist-sized chunk of black flesh clasped within it. The chunk of flesh resembled a heart, but had 7 orifices, and it was pulsing rhythmically as if it were breathing. The fatal weakness of a corpse wraith does not lie in its dantian, its head, or its heart. Instead, it lies in this thing, which is known as a baleful embryo. It's through this thing that it was able to gather baleful chi and become a corpse wraith. However, it's also exactly because of this that the baleful embryo is particularly vulnerable to baleful chi attacks, Moguang explained as he slowly withdrew his hand. As soon as his voice trailed off, the corpse wraith's body disintegrated into countless dark purple sand-like granules before dissipating into a cloud of black smoke. What do you plan to do with this baleful embryo, fellow Taoist Han? Moguang asked. You slew the corpse wraith, so its baleful embryo naturally goes to you, Han Li replied. Moguang gave a nod of gratitude, then crushed the baleful embryo into powder to reveal a longan-sized bead inside. Before Han Li had a chance to catch a clear glimpse of the object, Moguang had already tossed it into his own mouth before swallowing it. If you don't need anything else from me, then I'll go back to seclusion, Moguang said. Thanks for your help, Han Li replied with a nod. With that, Moguang stepped back into the door of silver light, then returned to the main building, where he sat down with his legs crossed atop his cushion. Shortly thereafter, the door of silver light gradually faded at Han Li's behest, and he promptly swallowed a pill, then took a moment to rest and recuperate before continuing to make his way deeper into the hall. Upon reaching the staircase that led to the 3rd floor of the pagoda, he released his spiritual sense to scour its entrance. Ren Hao had chosen the second path, so he should have entered this pagoda as well, yet Han Li hadn't been able to detect his presence at all on the way here, and that was very strange. Could it be that he didn't enter this pagoda? After conducting a brief inspection, Han Li didn't discover anything amiss, and only then did he make his way up the staircase. Upon reaching the 3rd floor, Han Li spotted an antiquated screen not far up ahead. The scenic painting on the screen was also severely faded, with only a faint outline remaining. The surface of the screen was also riddled with gashes, and there were many cracks and sword marks even on the frame of the screen, so it was a small miracle that it was even standing at all. Han Li took a step forward, then stopped in his tracks for a moment as his expression changed ever so slightly, only to continue onward as if nothing had happened. As he reached the screen, he was able to see several wooden shelves littered throughout the room through the gashes on the screen. The shelves were laden with all types of vases and books, and it seemed that this had once been a study. However, only after making his way around the screen did he discover that there were close to 100 of these shelves, but most of them had already been completely destroyed, and the ones that he had seen through the screen were the only ones that remained standing. Han Li slowly made his way through the toppled shelves, then picked up one of the books that was still relatively intact, and inscribed on the cover of the book was the title Metal Stone Journal. He briefly flipped through the pages of the book to discover that it wasn't a cultivation art or secret technique at all. Instead, it was a book dedicated to cataloging different metals and minerals. After that, he flipped through a few more books, only to discover that they were also just ordinary miscellaneous books. It looks like whoever was living here had a very broad range of interests. Han Li continued onward, passing through a series of doors before reaching the deepest point on the third floor. As soon as he stepped through the final door, he immediately felt a burst of formidable time-law power fluctuations surging toward him. He cast his gaze forward to discover a blue pond with a radius of around 200 to 300 feet, and the water in the pond was extremely clear. The term waters of time immediately sprang into Han Li's mind upon seeing this. Why are the time-law power fluctuations so potent here? Could it be that this pond is filled entirely with the waters of time? Intrigued by this discovery, Han Li carefully searched through the pond with his spiritual sense, upon which he discovered that aside from just time-law power fluctuations, there was also a burst of immense vitality present within the pond. He strode over to the pond before peering over its edge, and only then did he discover that there was a body floating on the surface of the water. A hint of surprise flashed through Han Li's eyes at the sight of the body. The body was no more than 5 feet tall, and it was as thin as a reed stick, but had an extraordinarily large neck that made it appear extremely disproportionate, as if it could sink headfirst into the water at any moment. However, the body was floating on the surface of the water in a completely still and stable fashion, and it looked as if it were fast asleep. The body was identical in appearance to the statue that Han Li had seen earlier at the entrance of the water divination pagoda. Furthermore, it was perfectly preserved without any signs of damage, but it was completely devoid of aura fluctuations. It looked as if it had only perished not long ago, and it was in vastly better condition than the decomposed bodies that Han Li had seen earlier. Han Li turned his attention from the body to the water beside it, upon which he noticed a blue shield that was around 2 feet in size. The shield was shimmering brightly and had a series of complex patterns etched all over its surface. No more than a few inches away from the badge was a blue crystalline flute that was also floating on the water. Hanging from one end of the flute was an intricate-looking tassel that had been fashioned out of 7 or 8 bamboo leaves. The two objects were brimming with spiritual qi, and the ravages of time didn't seem to have affected them at all. Furthermore, both of them were giving off formidable time-law power fluctuations, indicating that they were powerful time-attribute immortal treasures. Instead of immediately reaching out to grab the two objects, Han Li turned slightly to the side, sneaking a glance at a round stone pillar situated in the northwestern corner of the hall with faint purple light flashing in his eyes. Somehow, Ren Hao had managed to fuse as one with that pillar, and his aura had almost been completely concealed. Thanks to the progress that Han Li had made in the 5th level of the spirit refinement technique, his spiritual sense had become even more sensitive than before, so he was able to detect Ren Hao's aura fluctuations as soon as he stepped onto the 3rd floor, but he was unable to ascertain exactly where he was. At the same time, he knew that Ren Hao had to have spotted him as well, so he had put on an oblivious act, pretending not to have noticed Ren Hao at all. Right at this moment, Han Li suddenly raised an eyebrow, then abruptly vanished from the spot. In the next instant, he landed on one of the horizontal beams up above, then completely restrained his own aura and spiritual sense fluctuations, and it was as if he had vanished into thin air. Shortly thereafter, Feng Qingyuan emerged from the stairwell, and he slowly made his way into the hall with a slightly tense expression. As he passed through the collapsed shelves, he briefly flipped through some of the pages strewn all over the floor, just as Han Li had done, only to also toss them aside upon realizing that none of them were very useful. As he did this, the tension in his eyes seemed to have faded a little, but he was walking even slower than before. Feng Qingyuan appeared to be moving in a casual fashion, but in reality, he was on high alert, covertly scanning his surroundings while also releasing his spiritual sense to encompass the entire hall. However, Han Li and Ren Hao were too well concealed for him to detect anything. All of a sudden, Feng Qingyuan sped up in his footsteps, rushing over to the pond in the deepest part of the hall in a flash, and from there, he immediately spotted Tai's blue shield and the blue flute. A hint of greed flashed through his eyes at the sight of the two immortal treasures, but just like Han Li, he also refrained from taking them. He had seen Ren Hao make his way down this path, and on the way here, he had noticed some clear signs of battle on the second floor, so it clearly didn't make sense for there to be no one on the third floor. "I can see where you are, fellow Taoist Ren. Why don't you come out to meet me?" Feng Qingyuan suddenly declared. Han Li reflexively cast his gaze toward the stone pillar that Ren Hao was concealed in upon hearing this, and he could see that Ren Hao had no intention of revealing himself, so he knew that Feng Qingyuan had to have been merely bluffing. As Feng Qingyuan's voice trailed off, the hall fell into silence once again. Feng Qingyuan's brows furrowed slightly in the wake of his failed bluff, and after some extensive contemplation, he was unable to suppress the greed in his heart as he swept a sleeve through the air to summon a golden eight-armed puppet. The puppet sprang onto the surface of the pond at his behest, darting over the water like an agile spider as it reached out for the pair of blue immortal treasures. Han Li's brows were tightly furrowed as he intently scrutinized the golden puppet, preparing to take the immortal treasures from the puppet as soon as they fell into its grasp. However, right as the golden puppet was about to grab onto the pair of immortal treasures, the still surface of the pond suddenly began to ripple violently, following which a blue figure shot out of the water, sending the golden puppet flying. A resounding clang rang out as the golden puppet fell heavily onto the edge of the pond. Immediately thereafter, a large blue foot stomped down onto its chest. The golden puppet was comparable in power to a late true immortal cultivator, yet it was unable to pose any resistance as its core crumbled under the foot of its assailant. All of this had taken place in the blink of an eye, and Feng Qingyuan had already shot back to over 1,000 feet away in retreat. At the same time, a red oil paper umbrella had appeared in his grasp as he cast a wary gaze forward. The foot that had stomped down onto the puppet's chest belonged to a creature with the head of a fish, but the body of a man, and its skin was covered in shimmering scales. Its aura was undetectable, but it was giving off extremely formidable time-law power fluctuations. A hint of remorse appeared in Feng Qingyuan's eyes at the sight of the creature, and he took a glance at the stairwell out of the corner of his eyes as he planned his escape. However, before he had a chance to do anything, the humanoid fish creature opened its mouth to reveal 2 rows of sharp teeth, then let loose a silent roar. Immediately thereafter, its body disintegrated into a cloud of blue mist, which surged directly toward Feng Qingyuan, who instantly opened his oil paper umbrella for protection. Wisps of crimson light emerged from the umbrella, encompassing his entire body to form a ball of crimson light, which sped away toward the stairwell. However, the cloud of blue mist was able to keep up with him with ease, and it reached the stairwell in the blink of an eye before completely inundating the ball of red light. A strangled cry of agony rang out from within the blue cloud, followed by the sound of something crashing to the ground, which was, in turn, followed by complete silence. Shortly thereafter, the blue cloud reverted back into the humanoid fish creature, and it jumped back into the pond, paying no heed to the pair of immortal treasures in the process. All that remained at the stairwell was a body that resembled a shriveled prune, and a tattered oil paper umbrella that was completely devoid of spiritual qi. Han Li was astonished to see this. Right at this moment, a purple figure emerged at the entrance of the third floor, and it was none other than Feng Lin. Han Li hurriedly concealed himself once again upon seeing this, and Feng Lin slowly made her way into the hall, then took an indifferent glance at Feng Qingyuan's body, seemingly completely unsurprised by what she was seeing. "Are you too hopping that I would also provoke that creature on my own? I'm afraid I'm not quite as foolish as Yuan Feng. Come out now, I know where you are," Feng Lin said as she glanced at the spots where Han Li and Ren Hao were hiding. At this moment, there was a layer of purple light flashing over Feng Lin's eyes, and Han Li was very surprised to see that not only was she also cultivating the infernal devilish eyes, her level of mastery in the ocular technique was superior even to his. Furthermore, her disposition had changed drastically. Gone was her former gentle and seductive demeanor, and in its place was the cold and regal aura of a detached queen. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li emerged from his hiding spot, and Ren Hao also followed suit. "That was not our intention at all, fellow Taoist Feng. That Feng Lin was nothing more than a reckless fool who's unworthy of traveling with us. In contrast, I hold a great deal of admiration for you and fellow Taoist Li," Ren Hao said with a smile. Han Li took an expressionless glance at Ren Hao and didn't say anything. "Speak up. The treasures are right in front of us, so how about we join forces to kill that thing? As for who gets the treasures, that'll be decided by our abilities," Feng Lin harumphed coldly. "I'm fine with that. That fish thing has some tricks up its sleeve, but it's definitely no match for all three of us," Ren Hao agreed with a nod, while Han Li continued to remain silent. "Do you not agree to this proposal, or do you have a better way to proceed, fellow Taoist Li?" Feng Lin asked as she turned to Han Li. "I have no objections with joining forces, but before that, would the two of you be able to enlighten me on exactly what that creature is? I'm afraid I'm not very knowledgeable in such matters," Han Li said. The humanoid fish creature was completely different from the average cultivator, in that it seemed to be some type of being formed by spiritual power. "I'm afraid I don't have an answer to that," Feng Lin said with a shake of her head, while Ren Hao also shook his head, expressing the same sentiment. Han Li was a little disappointed to hear this. With the plan established, Han Li's trio briefly discussed some strategy, then collectively darted toward the blue pond from 3 different directions. Ren Hao was the fastest of the 3, reaching the pond in a flash before reaching out to make a grabbing motion with one hand. A blue beastly claw the size of house instantly appeared above the pond, and the claw was brimming with immense power as it made a grab for the blue shield in the pond. The blue fish creature emerged from the pond once again, and it raised a hand to summon a blue staff, which struck the beastly claw with a resounding thump. The beastly claw was instantly destroyed upon contact, but Ren Hao didn't appear all that surprised to see this, as he quickly made a hand seal. The giant blue sword behind him instantly rose up into the sky as a streak of blue light at his behest, and it swelled drastically to over 1,000 feet in size before crashing down upon the blue fish creature. The sound of turbulent waves rang out in the nearby space, and the air became incredibly heavy. Meanwhile, Feng Lin had also sprung into action, raising a hand to release a burst of black light, which transformed into a giant black gate. The gate was over 100 feet tall and 20 to 30 feet wide, and it seemed to be covered in dried blood. There was a pair of dark purple rings on the gate, and a pair of fearsome devilish deities were engraved onto its surface. Boundless devilish qi was surging out of the giant gate, and Feng Lin chanted an incantation before opening her mouth to release a ball of blood essence that fused into the gate. The eyes of the devilish deities engraved onto the gate instantly began to glow red, and they opened their mouths in unison to release two bursts of crimson light, which transformed into a pair of large crimson hands that grabbed onto the purple rings before wrenching the gate open. The sound of ghostly howls instantly rang out from beyond the gate, and a thick pillar of black light erupted out from within, hurtling directly toward the blue fish creature. The black light churned as it took on the form of a series of human and beastly faces, all of which were twisted in agony and howling in torment. Meanwhile, Han Li had also arrived at the pond, and he was instantly struck by a sense of discomfort in the face of the pillar of black light, forcing him to channel his spirit refinement technique to clear his own mind. He took a brief glance at Feng Lin, then swept a sleeve through the air to release three small azure swords, all of which instantly swelled drastically in size as thick arcs of golden lightning emerged over them. Han Li began to chant an incantation while sweeping a sleeve through the air, and the three giant azure swords hurtled directly toward the humanoid fish creature with golden lightning crackling all around them. In the face of all of the oncoming attacks, a fierce look appeared on the creature's face as it swept its staff through the air, unleashing countless blue staff projections around itself, forming a light barrier to withstand the assault. It was unclear whether Han Li's trio was actually going all out, but in the face of these relentless waves of attacks, even the average early-high zenith cultivator would have already been overwhelmed. A string of earth-shattering explosions rang out, and the barrier of staff projections was rapidly whittled down before collapsing completely. The staff in the humanoid fish creature's hand was also shattered, but in the next instant, an antiquated blue fishing rod appeared in its grasp, with an extremely thin and fragile-looking blue line attached to it. The creature swung the rod through the air, and the line immediately began to spin rapidly around it, conjuring up waves of blue light in its wake. The space around the creature began to warp, forming a series of rapidly revolving blue vortexes, and the three azure bamboo cloudswarm swords came crashing down upon the vortexes to release a vast eruption of golden lightning, but the lightning was instantly devoured upon contact. As for the vortexes, they merely shuddered slightly before returning to a stable state. Han Li felt as if his three swords had struck a vast sea, and the tremendous power that they possessed was completely devoured by the boundless seawater, thereby completely nullifying them. Almost at the exact same time, the giant blue sword summoned by Ren Hao also struck the blue vortexes with tremendous force, only to also be completely nullified. Meanwhile, the pillar of black light that had erupted out of the black gate had also been withstood by the blue vortexes, but Feng Lin seemed to have already anticipated that this would happen, and she quickly made a hand seal, upon which a series of silver spirit patterns appeared on the giant black gate. Immediately thereafter, countless silver runes erupted out of the gate before fusing into the pillar of black light, causing it to turn semi-transparent. A dull thump rang out, and with some difficulty, the pillar of black light was able to pierce through the blue vortexes before inundating the humanoid fish creature. A pained look immediately appeared on the creature's face, and its movements also appeared to have been severely inhibited. Feng Lin made another hand seal, and a giant figure with devilish chi swirling around its body abruptly sprang out of the pillar of black light. The devilish creature was around 100 feet tall and extremely menacing in appearance, with a pair of curved horns protruding out of its head of crimson hair. Its hands and feet were covered in scales, and it was holding a black steel trident. Furthermore, it was giving off an incredibly fearsome aura that instantly filled the entire hall, and even Ren Hao and Han Li couldn't help but shudder slightly at the sound of its sinister cackling. All of a sudden, Moguang's alarmed voice rang out in his mind. "This is one of the 13 devilish kings among our extra-realm heavenly devil race, the Viasa king. Be on your guard, fellow Taoist Han. The Viasa King is different from normal extra-realm heavenly devils as it doesn't specialize in using inner demons and illusions to harm others. Instead, it can directly harm the soul of its target, thereby making it very difficult to deal with. Han Li's heart stirred slightly upon hearing this. Right at this moment, Feng Lin let loose a loud cry, and a burst of radiant black light erupted out of the trident in the Viasa King's hands as it was thrust into the humanoid fish creature's body. A dull thump rang out as the creature exploded into a cloud of blue mist, and an elated look appeared in Feng Lin's eyes as a burst of black qi erupted out of the pillar of black light, then reached out for the pair of treasures in the pond like a giant black hand. An urgent look appeared in Ren Hao's eyes upon seeing this, but with the blue vortexes standing in his way, all he could do was watch. In contrast, Han Li merely looked on without doing anything. Right as the pair of treasures was about to be swept up by the burst of black qi, the cloud of blue mist suddenly converged to reform the humanoid fish creature, and it appeared to be completely unharmed. As soon as it reappeared, the creature swung its fishing rod through the air, and the burst of black qi instantly exploded. "Impossible," Feng Lin exclaimed in an incredulous voice. This Viasa gate was her bonded immortal treasure, and it had taken her an immeasurable amount of time and effort to refine it in accordance with an ancient tool refinement manual that she had obtained from a set of ruins in the Devil Realm. For this immortal treasure, she had spent virtually all of her savings, but given the treasure's immense power, it was a decision that she didn't regret. Just that pillar of Viasa devilish light alone would have been enough to harm the soul of a cultivator of same cultivation base as herself, and the Viasa King projection could stand toe-to-toe against even a high zenith cultivator. Yet somehow, the humanoid fish creature was completely unscathed after being struck by both. Right at this moment, the creature swung its arm through the air again, and the bluey fishing line swept through the air before intertwining to form a blue net, which encompassed the Viasa gate. Feng Lin's expression changed drastically upon seeing this, and she hurriedly made a rapid string of hand seals. The Viasa gate began to glow with radiant black light as it trembled violently in an attempt to free itself from the net. But the net only continued to constrict tighter, while pulling the Viasa gate quickly toward the pond like a floundering fish. At the same time, two more blue lines shot out of the fishing rod, springing toward Han Li's 3 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords and Ren Hao's blue sword. Having witnessed the power of the fishing line, Han Li immediately sprang into action, and the 3 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords darted back in retreat amid a flash of golden lightning to evade the fishing lines. Ren Hao also hurriedly summoned his blue sword back to himself, and the two of them exchanged an astonished glance with one another. The fact that the humanoid fish creature was able to gain the upper hand while facing all three of them at once was nothing short of extraordinary. A contemplative look appeared in Han Li's eyes as he considered whether A should use his time law powers. Otherwise, defeating this creature seemed next to impossible. Right at this moment, a resounding boom rang out from Feng Lin's direction, and a wave of black light erupted out of her body, then expanded rapidly in all directions to form a black spirit domain that instantly encompassed the entire hall. Countless black devilish shadows were flashing within the spirit domain, letting loose harrowing howls of agony. As soon as the black spirit domain emerged, it seemed to resonate with the Viasa gate, and the black light radiating from the latter brightened significantly, while the pair of devilish deities engraved upon it also seemed to have sprung to life, letting loose a collective thunderous roar. An incredibly violent burst of power erupted out of the Viasa gate, causing the nearby space to tremble violently, and the gate shuddered to a halt. Enshrouded within the black spirit domain, the blue vortexes around the humanoid fish creature dimmed significantly, and Ren Hao's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this as he made a hand seal. Bright blue light erupted out of his body, then spread outward to form another spirit domain. Countless blue waves were churning and rumbling incessantly within the spirit domain, and the blue vortexes around the humanoid fish creature dimmed even further. "Fellow Taoist Li," Ren Hao yelled as he turned to Han Li, and it was clear what he wanted. Han Li was rather hesitant to oblige, but in the end he chose to comply, unleashing his own time spirit domain. Both Ren Hao and Feng Lin were astonished upon sensing the time law power fluctuations within Han Li's spirit domain. All of the laws of the great Tao contained the profound secrets of the world, so mastering any single one of them was exceedingly difficult, and this was especially the case for the three paramount laws, one of which was the laws of time. Han Li was but a golden immortal just like them. Yet not only was he cultivating the laws of time. It was clear from his spirit domain that he had reached quite a high level of mastery in the laws of time, so how could they not be astonished? Encompassed within Han Li's time spirit domain, the humanoid fish creature was rooted to the spot, and at this point, the blue vortexes around it could barely even be seen at all. Right at this moment, a fierce look appeared in Han Li's eyes, and 9 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords flew out of his sleeve in rapid succession, then collectively swelled drastically in size. In the next instant, all 9 swords came crashing down upon the blue vortexes at his behest. Ren Hao immediately snapped back to his senses, letting loose a thunderous roar as the giant blue sword beside him shot forth through the air. At the same time, he began to chant an incantation, and all of the blue wave projections within his spirit domain surged into the blue sword. As a result, the blue light radiating from the sword brightened even further, and it abruptly vanished into thin air, only to reappear above the blue vortexes just an instant later. At this point, it had already swelled to several thousand feet in size, and it came crashing down right behind Han Li's 9 swords. Even though Feng Lin's bonded immortal treasure was still trapped, she also gritted her teeth and swept a sleeve through the air to release a fist-sized black seal with a black tiger projection around it. She then began to chant an incantation as she thrust a palm toward the black seal, and a thunderous tiger's roar instantly rang out as the black tiger projection opened its mouth up wide, causing all of the black shadows within her spirit domain to surge into the black seal. As a result, the seal swelled rapidly in size, reaching the size of a house in the blink of an eye, and it was radiating dazzling black light as it came crashing down upon the blue vortexes. A hint of unease finally appeared on the humanoid fish being's face, and it attempted to swing its blue fishing rod through the air, but its movements were extremely slow and sluggish in Han Li's time spirit domain, so it was unable to react before the oncoming attack struck the blue vortexes around it. An earth-shattering boom rang out as radiant light of different colors erupted into the heavens, presenting a blinding sight. The blue vortexes trembled violently, and a series of cracks appeared over them. The cracks quickly spread, following which the vortexes collapsed to reveal the humanoid fish being behind them. "Die!" Feng Lin yelled as she thrust her palms forward, and the black light radiating from the black seal brightened even further as it hurtled directly toward the creature. Ren Hao also let loose a low roar before swinging an arm through the air, sending the giant blue sword crashing down upon the creature. A hint of panic finally appeared on the humanoid fish creature's face, and it opened its mouth to release a cloud of dense blue mist, which drifted toward the black seal and the blue sword, while the creature sprang back toward the pond. At the same time, blue light flashed erratically over its body, releasing violent time law power fluctuations, and it was quickly recovering its speed and agility. "You're not getting away," Han Li yelled as he flipped a hand over to summon the small golden lock, then opened his mouth to release a burst of golden light into it. The lock instantly lit up with dazzling golden radiance, transforming into a ball of golden light that vanished into the time-spirit domain in a flash. In the next instant, a giant golden lock appeared beside the humanoid fish creature amid a flash of golden light, and it locked itself around one of the creature's arms. Immediately thereafter, a giant rune emerged from the lock before encompassing the creature's entire body. Thanks to the support provided by Han Li's time-spirit domain, the rune released by the golden lock was several times larger than before, and not only was it able to trap the humanoid fish creature, most of the blue mist around the creature was also encompassed within it. Both the humanoid fish creature and the cloud of blue mist were instantly immobilized, and in the next instant, the black seal and the blue sword came crashing down upon the creature's body in unison. A dull thump rang out as the creature's body exploded into a burst of blue liquid that splattered in all directions. Much of the blue liquid splattered onto the immortal treasures being wielded by Han Li's trio, and a sizzling sound instantly rang out as the spiritual light on the surfaces of the three immortal treasures flashed erratically, then began to rapidly dim, as if they were being subjected to severe corrosion. Ren Hao hurriedly withdrew his blue sword to avoid further damage, but right at this moment, Han Li and Feng Lin shot right past him, flying toward the blue pond without any regard for their respective immortal treasures. Ren Hao also sprang into action upon seeing this, letting loose a loud roar as he shot forward as quickly as he could, but ultimately he was too slow to react, and at this point, Han Li and Feng Lin had already arrived above the pond. Feng Lin swept a hand through the air, releasing a burst of black light to envelop the blue flute, while Han Li released a burst of azure light, which transformed into a large azure hand that grabbed onto the blue shield. The shield was slightly cool and soft to the touch, but was also quite resilient and sturdy. A hint of elation flashed through Han Li's eyes, and he was just about to stow the shield away when he noticed something out of the corner of his eye. The space beside him was rippling slightly, and immediately thereafter, a crimson bead appeared out of thin air. Han Li's expression changed drastically as bright golden light erupted out of his body, but before he had a chance to do anything else, an earth-shattering boom rang out as the crimson bead exploded into a crimson sun that was several hundred feet in size, completely inundating his body. Bursts of white flames emerged within the crimson sun, and they were giving off incredibly fearsome heat, burning a series of holes into the nearby space. The time-spirit domain that encompassed the entire hall instantly vanished, reverting the flow of time in the area back to normal. A burst of devastating shockwaves spread through the air in all directions, forming ferocious gusts of wind, and the entire hall trembled violently, but managed to remain standing. The hall had to have been constructed out of some type of exceptionally sturdy material, considering it had survived everything that had transpired up to this point. A ball of blue light tumbled through the air, and it was none other than the blue shield. Ren Hao rushed over to the shield in a flash, then grabbed onto it with an ecstatic expression. "What the hell are you doing?" Feng Lin yelled in a cold voice as she darted away to avoid being caught up in the crimson sun. At the same time, the black seal in the Viasa gate shot back through the air before circling around above her head. With the humanoid fish creature slain, the threads of blue light that were trapping HTE Viasa gate had vanished. "What am I doing? I'm claiming this treasure, of course." Ren Hao chuckled coldly as he opened his mouth to release a ball of blue light, which carried the blue shield into his body. "That was a 9 destructions flame bead just now. I've heard that it's capable of killing even high zenith cultivators. Looks like I underestimated you," Feng Lin said in a cold voice as she took a wary glance at the raging crimson sun. Having been struck by such a powerful weapon, Han Li was most likely already dead. Of course, I had to have some trump cards up my sleeve for this foray into the true mantra sect ruins. I'm sure you also have similar treasures in your possession. You're simply saving them for another time, Ren Hao chuckled. We agreed to join forces against that creature, then let our abilities decide who gets to claim the two treasures in the pond, yet you've betrayed our agreement and attacked your own ally. As expected, the robe change order is filled with treacherous scum. Feng Lin spat in a cold voice. This is how things should be. I don't feel safe traveling with someone capable of wielding time law powers, and only by killing him can I ensure that you and I won't be under threat from him, wouldn't you agree? Besides, he deserved what he got. If he had been more powerful than me, then he would have been well within his rights to kill me instead. Ren Hao scoffed with a disdainful expression. Right at this moment, a cold voice rang out from within the Crimson Sun. Is that right? In that case, I'll take you up on that offer. Ren Hao and Feng Lin's expressions changed drastically upon hearing this, with the former displaying a particularly strong reaction. Right at this moment, Han Li emerged from the Crimson Sun completely unscathed, and even his robes hadn't been damaged at all. His mantra-treasured axis was slowly revolving behind him, and the entire area within a radius of roughly 10 feet around his body was enshrouded within a series of golden ripples. In the face of the golden ripples, all of the surrounding fearsome white flames fell completely still, and only after he passed them by did the flames revert back to normal. Ren Hao stared at Han Li with an astonished expression for a moment, then fled toward the stairwell as a blue shadow. A cold sneer appeared on Han Li's face as he instantly released his time spirit domain to encompass the entire hall, and Ren Hao's escape immediately slowed down to a crawl. Immediately thereafter, Han Li appeared in front of him amid a flash of golden lightning, then swept a sleeve through the air to summon 9 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords. The 9 swords combined into a single giant azure sword at his behest, and he swung the sword down upon Ren Hao with tremendous power. An earth-shattering boom rang out as Ren Hao shot back like a cannonball before crashing heavily into a wall, causing the entire hall to tremble violently. He immediately scrambled to his feet with a horrified look on his face, having donned a suit of blue armor that consisted of countless blue scales. He was also wearing a helmet that resembled a dragon's head, while his limbs were sheathed in protective armor that resembled dragon claws. It was as if he had suddenly transformed into a blue dragon. The nostrils on the helmet were dilating and contracting incessantly, as if they were breathing, and the entire suit of armor was giving off an incredibly formidable draconic aura. However, there was currently a large gash on the shoulder of the suit of armor, clearly having just been inflicted by Han Li's sword strike. That's the dragon battle armor of the Black Soil, Immortal region's holy dragon palace. Feng Lin exclaimed at the sight of the suit of blue armor, and a hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face upon hearing this. Upon arriving in the Black Soil Immortal region, he had been reading extensively to learn as much as he could about the Immortal region, and during the process, he was able to accumulate a great deal of knowledge pertaining to all of the major sects in the Immortal region. The Holy Dragon Palace was one such sect, and it was founded by a formidable cultivator who carried a true dragon bloodline. Hence, the dragon was a symbol of reverence for the sect, which ranked among the top 5 sects of the Black Soil Immortal region. Furthermore, the Holy Dragon Palace excelled in refining all types of immortal treasures and armor, and in particular, the armor that it produced wasn't inferior even compared with the armor refined by the 100 Creations Mountain. During a conversation with Taoist Master Jingyang, in which they had discussed matters related to tool refinement, Taoist Master Jingyang had mentioned this sect with a great deal of praise and respect. As it turned out, the armor of the Holy Dragon Palace truly did live up to its resounding reputation, allowing Ren Hao to survive that all-out sword strike from Han Li. "You think a mere suit of armor will be enough to save your life?" Han Li sneered, and instead of immediately pouncing at Ren Hao, he remained still on the spot as 9 balls of light of different colors erupted out of his body, then took on the form of a series of true spirit projections. In addition to Han Li's previous collection of true spirit bloodlines, he now also possessed the Nightmare Dragon bloodline, which he had obtained from Kling. After slaying Kling, Han Li had taken her body, and while traversing through the primordial land, he had taken the time to refine Kling's Nightmare Dragon bloodline and integrate it into his own body. All of a sudden, all of the true spirit projections vanished into Han Li's body at his behest, and in the next instant, he transformed into a purplish-golden devilish deity with 3 heads and 6 arms. With a flick of his wrist, 9 time-law threads shot forth before fusing into the giant azure sword in his grasp, and a row of golden runes instantly appeared on its surface. The nearby world's origin chi shuddered, then converged to form countless specks of 5-colored light that surged toward the giant sword from all directions, drastically enhancing its already formidable aura. All of the color was drained from Ren Hao's face at the sight of Han Li's astonishing display of power, and he hurriedly fled the scene as a blue shadow. At the same time, he swept a sleeve through the air to release 7 or 8 glowing immortal treasures, filling the entire hall before hurtling toward the devilish deity from all directions, ensuring that there was no way for Han Li could get to him through the immortal treasures. However, Han Li was completely unconcerned as he swept an arm through the air, releasing a vast expanse of green light that swept up all of the immortal treasure. The spiritual light emanating from the immortal treasures instantly faded, and all that remained were the immortal treasures themselves, suspended in midair within the green light like fish caught in a net. With another sweep of Han Li's arm, all of the immortal treasures vanished along with the green light, and all of this had taken place in an instant. An incredulous look appeared on Ren Hao's face upon seeing this. After stowing the immortal treasures away, Han Li took a step forward, instantly vanishing from the spot. In the next instant, he appeared right in Ren Hao's path, blocking his path of escape as he swung down his giant azure sword. Enshrouded within the time-spirit domain, Ren Hao was far slower than Han Li, and there was no way for him to escape. "Curse you!" Ren Hao roared in a desperate voice as a hint of despair surfaced in his eyes, and he lashed out with his giant blue sword. The 2 swords clashed, and the azure sword was able to slice its counterpart into 2 with ease, then continued onward without pause to strike Ren Hao with immense power. Ren Hao's eyes opened up wide as he opened his mouth to release a burst of blood essence into his suit of armor, and at the same time, he injected all of the immortal spiritual power in his body into his armor as well. The suit of armor instantly began to glow radiantly, and a blue film of light similar to Han Li's true extreme film emerged to oppose the azure sword. However, the giant azure sword possessed unmatched power, and it was able to quickly slice through the blue membrane of light before striking the suit of armor, where it drew to a halt for a split second before slicing into the armor as well. "No, you're going to regret this." Ren Hao howled in a despairing voice as his body exploded into countless scraps of flesh and blood. The tremendous sword chi of the azure bamboo cloudswarm swords had infiltrated his body and detonated it from the inside. On top of that, his nascent soul had also been completely destroyed by the sword chi, while the suit of blue armor had exploded into countless pieces as well. Han Li made a beckoning motion with one hand, plucking out a shimmering blue storage ring from Ren Hao's remains, then reverted back to his human form in the blink of an eye, while the giant azure sword also split back up into 9 azure bamboo cloudswarm swords before vanishing into his body. A hint of wariness emerged in Feng Lin's eyes as she gazed upon Han Li. But Han Li didn't even bother to look at her as he turned his gaze to the body of the large-headed child instead. He didn't have to expend much of his energy in killing Ren Hao, but senseless battle was still something that he wanted to avoid, so he had no intention of fighting over the flute with Feng Lin, and his attention was instead turned to the body floating in the pond. He was aware of who this child was, so even during his battles against the humanoid fish creature and Ren Hao, he had been keeping an eye on the body this entire time, but he didn't notice anything amiss during his observation. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li reached out to make a grabbing motion, and a burst of azure light surged out of his sleeve, gently enveloping the child's body before slowly dragging it out of the pond. All of a sudden, the body accelerated without any warning, arriving before Han Li in an instant. Its large head was almost in direct contact with Han Li's forehead, while the tip of its nose was on the verge of reaching Han Li's chin. Under normal circumstances, Han Li would have been able to react in a timely fashion, BTU for some reason. The body's movements were extremely strange and also seemed to be imbued with some type of time law powers, catching him completely off guard. Immediately thereafter, the body's eyelids shuddered slightly before its eyes sprang open, and it observed Han Li momentarily through a pair of blue eyes, then abruptly opened its mouth to release a ball of blue light toward him. The ball of blue light struck him on the glabella, and he felt as if a thunderclap had exploded in his consciousness, causing his ears to ring incessantly. Before he had a chance to inspect his own internal condition, the body uttered the phrase, "Kill Chi Mozi," following which its eyes and mouth fell shut again. Immediately thereafter, countless thin cracks that were glowing with blue light emerged over the body, and it began to shatter like a piece of porcelain before disintegrating into a cloud of blue smoke that dissipated into nothingness in an instant. Han Li shuddered as he snapped back to his senses, and he felt as if he had just awoken from a dream. Meanwhile, Feng Lin was standing several thousand feet away, looking on with a perplexed expression. From her perspective, Han Li seemed to have experienced a moment of disorientation after bending down, and she had no idea what had happened after that. However, when she turned to look into the pond again, she was surprised to discover that the body of the large-headed child had vanished. Right at this moment, the sound of splashing rang out from within the pond, and Feng Lin noticed that a vortex that was around half a foot wide had taken shape within it. The vortex swept up all of the blue liquid in the pond, sending it rapidly funneling downward, and the pond was almost completely emptied in the blink of an eye. Han Li was right beside the pond, and he reacted very quickly, hurriedly making a grabbing motion to conjure up a large azure hand that scooped up a ball of blue water from the bottom of the pond. However, that was all that he managed to scoop up before the remaining water in the pond was completely funneled away. Han Li heaved a faint sigh as he flipped a hand over to produce a white jade vial, then deposited the blue water into it before stowing the vial away in his storage bracelet. He then took a glance at the bottom of the pond to discover that there were thousands of fist-sized blue rocks embedded into its surface, and they were giving off abundant spiritual chi. They contained no law powers, but they were clearly some type of exceptional water attribute material. There are still some water attribute materials left in this place. How about we split them among ourselves and avoid further battle, fellow Taoist Feng? Han Li proposed as he turned to Feng Lin with a smile. That would be best, Feng Lin replied with a smile of her own. With that, both of them sprang into action, collecting the water attribute materials in the pond and the rest of the hall. After that, the two of them conducted a thorough search through the 3-story pagoda, and only after ensuring that there was nothing else of value to be taken did they exit the pagoda together. I'm planning to keep going down this path. Would you like to accompany me, fellow Taoist Feng? Han Li asked as he cast his gaze toward the area beyond the pagoda, which was enshrouded in mist. "I'll pass. I'm planning to return the same way I came and go down one of the other paths," Feng Lin replied. After witnessing Han Li's powers, she had become very apprehensive of him, so she naturally didn't dare to accompany him any longer. Of course, this was precisely the response that Han Li wanted, so he made no effort to keep her. "In that case, this is where we part ways. Take care, fellow Taoist Feng." Following Feng Lin's departure, Han Li directed his spiritual sense deep into his own consciousness to conduct a close inspection. At this moment, all was calm and tranquil in his consciousness, but there was a ball of blue light hovering within it. As soon as Han Li's spiritual sense made contact with the ball of blue light, it immediately transformed into a screen of blue light that was rippling incessantly, and there was a passage of text consisting of thousands of golden characters on the screen. Han Li discovered that this was the full 9-part cultivation art of the water divination time arts, 2 more than what he had received from the vast flow palace. Enclosed after the cultivation art were some of the insights that the large-headed child had gleaned while cultivating the water divination time arts, and that by itself was over 3,000 characters in length. After Han Li memorized everything, the screen of blue light faded away along with the golden characters inscribed upon it. Han Li slowly opened his eyes as a hint of elation flashed through them, but given his current circumstances, this was naturally not the right time to be studying the cultivation art. With that in mind, he continued to make his way deeper down the path. Beyond the pagoda was a sparse forest that was also filled with the same mist that impeded both visibility and spiritual sense, so Han Li had no choice but to progress slowly through the area. Thankfully, the trip proved to be quite uneventful, and all Han Li encountered along the way were some bodies belonging to true mantra sect and heavenly court cultivators. After traveling for around 6 hours, the surrounding vegetation became even sparser, but the mist up ahead had become even denser. Upon emerging from the forest, Han Li discovered that there was a giant lotus pond that was over 10,000 feet in radius up ahead, and the water in the pond resembled rippling green jade. White mist was surging incessantly over the pond, and there were numerous pink and white lotus flowers littered over its surface, presenting a breathtaking sight to behold. Unfortunately, Han Li was in no mood for sightseeing, and he was just about to pass over the pond when he suddenly spotted something and drew to a halt. Interesting. No wonder the world's origin chi is so abundant here. Han Li hovered in midair as he carefully observed the pond below for a moment, and he discovered that the lotus flowers on the pond appeared to be distributed in a completely haphazard fashion, but in reality, they were arranged into a large formation. After a brief moment of contemplation, he descended onto the pond, then looked down with his infernal devilish eye, which allowed him to see the distribution of lotus flowers over the pond with even greater clarity. A faint smile appeared on his face as he swept a hand through the air, releasing a burst of silver flames that transformed into a silver fire raven, which flew in a circle around the pond, and all of the lotus pads in the pond were instantly set alight. Within mere moments, all of the lotus pads in the pond had been incinerated into ashes by the essence fire raven, and the pond had become completely barren and lifeless. Even so, the dense white mist over the pond refused to dissipate, and the lotus flowers also still remained. This seemed to have come as no surprise to Han Li, and he made a beckoning motion to summon the essence fire raven back to himself. Upon flying back to Han Li, the fire raven transformed into a tiny silver figure that skipped its way onto his shoulder. The silver figure then began to look around with a perplexed expression, wondering why Han Li had instructed it to burn down all of the lotus flowers in the pond, but not finish the job. If it had been granted just a little more time, it would have reduced all of the lotus flowers to ashes as well. All of a sudden, specks of green light began to appear around the lotus flowers, following which some green buds began to sprout among them, and the surrounding mist also began to swirl violently. Shortly thereafter, the buds began to unfurl at a rate that was discernible even to the naked eye, and before long, the entire pond was filled with lotus pads once again. This was not the result of some illusion. Instead, there was simply such an immense abundance of spiritual chi in the pond that these lotus pads were able to almost instantly regrow, albeit with the assistance of a formation. The silver figure's eyes widened with shock upon seeing this, and silver flames rose up all over its body as it prepared to swoop down to incinerate the lotus pads once again. However, Han Li raised a hand to pat it on the head, indicating for it to stay put, and the flames around its body faded, following which it flew back up Han Li's sleeve. At this point, the layout of the pond had already become clear to him, and he flew several thousand feet horizontally, arriving above one of the pink lotus flowers before reaching down toward it. He then made a grabbing motion, and a large azure hand appeared, then grabbed onto the pink lotus flower before uprooting it. Its roots were glowing blue, and there was an incredibly beautiful translucent blue lotus flower hanging from them. As soon as this blue lotus flower emerged from the water, all of the other pink lotus flowers in the pond instantly began to wilt. However, all of the lotus pads in the pond were still standing instead of also withering away, but they had lost their previous green luster, as if they had also been robbed of their vitality. At the same time, the dense white mist over the pond slowly began to dissipate bit by bit. Han Li paid no heed to the changes taking place in the pond, as he observed the translucent blue lotus flower in his hand, and a faint smile appeared on his face as he sensed the potent water law power fluctuations emanating from it. All of a sudden, his right index and middle fingers lit up, and a door of silver light emerged before him. He stepped through the door into the flower branch domain, arriving at the golden lotus pond outside the bamboo building, before planting the blue lotus flower and the pink lotus flower that it was connected to into the pond. The blue lotus flower instantly took root where it was planted, and 6 pink lotus flowers quickly emerged within the pond, releasing wisps of faint mist. At the same time, a faint breeze began to blow through the area, carrying the faint mist to all parts of the domain, creating an even greater abundance of spiritual chi in the entire area. Moguang was cultivating on the 2nd floor of the bamboo building, and his eyes instantly sprang open as he sensed this sudden change. However, he only briefly observed the changes that had taken place in the domain, then took a glance in Han Li's direction before closing his eyes again. Over at the Spirit Medicine Garden, Taoist Zai was standing by the railing of a recently constructed bamboo building, looking on with a surprised expression. Han Li stood in midair with a faint smile on his face, and his hands clasped behind his back, allowing his robes to flap in the breeze. After ensuring that nothing was going amiss, he gave a pleased nod. With this blue lotus flower working in conjunction with the existing formation and the golden lotus flowers, the circulation of spiritual chi in the domain had become far more fluid, thereby severely reducing the rate of energy expenditure from the immortal origin stones. With no more work left to be done, Han Li emerged from the flower branch domain, then flew over the lotus pond outside to continue onward. Ali. Meanwhile, in another set of ruins somewhere in the True Mantra sect. The ruins were filled with collapsed buildings, walls, and pillars, and littered throughout the wreckage were countless bodies belonging to True Mantra sect and Heavenly Court cultivators. Some of them clearly possessed very advanced cultivation bases at their time of death, as evidenced by the fact that their skeletons were still glowing faintly, even though it had already been countless years since they perished. At the center of the set of ruins was a relatively well-preserved giant palace, but it was rather strange in appearance, looking much like a crimson flame that was completely still. Above the entrance of the palace hung a giant plaque that read, "Flowing Fire Palace." Even now, there were still waves of heat slowly surging forth from the walls of the palace, causing the nearby air to shimmer and warp, and it was unclear whether this was because the palace had been constructed out of some type of special material, or if there were things like pill refinement cauldrons inside it. At this moment, a string of resounding booms were ringing out incessantly in front of the entrance of the palace. There were two spirit domains overlapping one another, one purple and one yellow, and inside the two spirit domains was a seductive woman in a purple palace dress, locked in battle against an hunchbacked elderly man with a sickly yellow complexion. The woman was none other than Yan Zian, the city lord of Illusory Smoke City. At this moment, there was a furious look in her eyes, and her brows were tightly furrowed, pushing the red mole on her glabella. She was holding a purple jade lute, and her fingers were quickly strumming over the lute's strings. Beautiful maidens conjured up out of illusory smoke emerged one after another, and all of them were holding curved purple blades as they launched themselves at the hunchbacked elderly man, who was swaying back and forth on the plaza in front of the palace, evading the oncoming smoky maidens with ease. His cultivation base was far superior to Yan Zian's, so there was no fear in his eyes whatsoever. Instead, his eyes were filled with mockery, and he seemed to be thoroughly enjoying the experience of having so many beautiful women around him, even if they were only conjured up out of smoke. His gaze was blatantly roaming over Yan Zian's chest and backside, and there was a perverted smile on his face as he chuckled. "You and I stuck in the middle of nowhere in these ruins, all by ourselves. So why don't we engage in some more fun activities than senseless battle, City Lord Yan?" "You recognize me?" Yan Zian asked in a grim voice. "How could I not? You're the mistress of the vastly renowned palace Master Fu. Unfortunately for you, Fu Yuanhai isn't around to save you in these ruins," the elderly man chuckled. "You're nothing but a perverted coward. If you truly had a spine, then you discard your robe change order disguise and show me your true appearance. I assure you that once we're out of these ruins, I'll call on Palace Master Fu, and the two of us will pay you a visit together." Yan Zian spat through gritted teeth. Despite what she was saying, she didn't dare to look down on her opponent. The elderly man's cultivation base was far superior to hers, and if it weren't for the fact that he was intentionally toying with his prey, there was no way that she would have been able to survive to this point completely unscathed. "Fine, if that's what you want, then your wish is my command," the hunchbacked elderly man said with a smile, then grabbed onto his own collar from behind before wrenching it forward. As a result, his robes and his skin were torn away, revealing a handsome man in a pristine white robe. "How about now? Is this appearance of mine more appealing to you?" Not only had his appearance completely changed, his demeanor and voice had also been drastically altered, and in the blink of an eye, he had become a completely different person. Yan Zian could see that there were no longer any signs of disguise on his body, indicating that this really was his true appearance, and a sense of foreboding immediately welled up in her heart. The fact that he was willing to reveal his true appearance to her indicated that he was going to make sure that she wasn't going to live to tell the tale of their encounter. The white-robed young man licked his lips at the sight of Yan Zian's apprehensive expression, then burst into laughter as he said, "Rest assured, there's no way I could bring myself to kill a woman as beautiful as you. Instead, I'm going to cut off all of your limbs and deprive you of all of your senses, then add you to my collection." A chill ran down Yan Zian's spine upon hearing this, and she grabbed tightly onto her lute, then suddenly pulled back its strings like bowstrings before releasing them in the white-robed young man's direction. A loud twang rang out as a pillar of purple light erupted out of the lute, transforming into a giant purple bat that swooped directly toward him. Within Yan Ziyan's purple spirit domain, the bat let loose a sharp screech, sending invisible sound waves sweeping through the air. In the face of this latest round of attacks, the white-robed young man merely smiled as he raised a hand, then released a string of incantation seals that vanished into the surrounding space. In the next instant, a series of large discs of light appeared within his yellow spirit domain, and they were revolving incessantly to weaken the soundwave attacks unleashed by the purple bat, but layers of creases were still appearing on his white robe. Shortly thereafter, the sound of tearing rang out, and countless tiny gashes appeared on his robes, while the discs of light began to disintegrate one after another. At the same time, the palatial ruins beside and behind the white-robed young man were trembling incessantly in the wake of the sound waves, and they quickly disintegrated into dust. A hint of elation appeared in Yan Ziyan's eyes upon seeing this, and she hurriedly began chanting an incantation while rapidly strumming the strings of her lute. A fierce look flashed through the purple bat's eyes, and it spread its wings before hurtling toward the white-haired young man as a streak of purple light. A hint of anger flashed through the young man's eyes at the sight of his torn robes, and he yelled, "I gave you a chance, but seeing as you insist on making things difficult for yourself, I suppose it can't be helped." He flipped a hand over as he spoke to summon a giant metal fan that was around 6 feet in length. Circles of complex yellow runes were etched onto the fan, and they were giving off formidable earth law power fluctuations. The metal fan spread open in front of him with a loud clang, revealing a creature with yellow fur etched onto its surface. The creature burst out of the fan as if it had sprung to life, then opened its cavernous mouth to release a ferocious tornado that was interspersed with yellow sand. A burst of violent rumbling rang out as the tornado swept through the air, pulverizing the purple bat in its path. All of a sudden, Yan Ziyan felt her own body become impossibly heavy, and she was unable to take evasive measures at all as she was sent flying by the yellow tornado, crashing through the gates of the flowing fire palace behind her. "Crap, I should have held back more. I really hope I didn't scar that pretty little face of hers." The white-robed young man cursed to himself as he hurriedly stowed away his metal fan before rushing before. However, before he had even reached the entrance of the palace, he suddenly heard a buzzing sound that resembled the sound of countless beetles flapping their wings at once. Immediately thereafter, Yan Ziyan's panicked voice rang out from within the palace. "No, what are these things?" As soon as her voice trailed off, she shot out of the hall, but only managed to rise about 1,000 feet up into the air before plummeting to the ground with a heavy thump. The white-robed young man faltered slightly upon seeing this, but he then immediately drew a sharp breath as soon as he caught a clear glimpse of Yan Ziyan. At this moment, her entire body was covered in tiny dark red insects, with specks of red flames dancing over their bodies. She was rolling on the ground in a frenzied panic with an agonized look on her face while moaning hoarsely, and there was a layer of faint golden mist around her. Wrinkles were beginning to appear on her youthful face at a rate that was discernible even to the naked eye, and her hair was also beginning to turn white. Whatever those insects were, they seemed to be burning through her vitality. Even though golden immortals were unable to avoid baleful decays, aside from that, they were theoretically immortal, so it was extraordinary that these insects were able to do this to her. A grim look instantly appeared on the white-robed young man's face, and he was just about to flee the scene when a giant figure came crashing down from the heavens like a steel pagoda, following which a fiery red spirit domain instantly spread over the surrounding area. The white-robed young man turned to discover an imposing foreign being with fiery red hair and the nose of a rhinoceros. There was a large golden ring hanging from each of his tapered ears, and a look of cold disdain on his face. The man was none other than Kai Rong. The white-robed young man was instantly plunged into the depths of despair upon sensing the late high zenith stage aura emanating from Kai Rong's body. To think that a mere golden immortal would dare to try and claim Master's Fire Age fireflies. Let's see how long it'll take to burn through your vitality, Kai Rong harumphed coldly. What Fire Age fireflies actually exist? The white-robed young man's entire body stiffened upon hearing this, and he recalled a rumor that had been circulating in the true immortal realm for a very long time. It was said that Fire Age fireflies were a type of spirit insect that was very similar in appearance to fireflies of the mortal world, but they possessed flames of time, which were imbued with time law powers, thereby allowing them to burn through the vitality of living beings. This vitality is then used as energy for them to reproduce, and any place that these insects pass through is generally left completely devoid of living beings. However, their lifespans were extremely short, generally only living for around a month, and if they couldn't find any living beings to incinerate, then they wouldn't be able to reproduce. Hence, there hadn't been many sightings of them. However, it was said that some cultivators who were adept at raising insects could use certain time attribute treasures or special restrictions to preserve these insects, and only release them when necessary. It was clear that such a restriction had existed in the Flowing Fire Palace, and only after Yan Ziyan inadvertently broke the restriction were these insects freed. With that in mind, a sheen of cold sweat surfaced on the white-robed young man's forehead. He was contemplating how he was going to escape when he noticed the red-haired man staring intently at him. His heart instantly jolted slightly upon seeing this, and he made a hand seal without any hesitation, upon which a yellow vortex appeared beneath him, swallowing up his body in the blink of an eye. However, it was a few seconds later when the white-robed young man was forcibly ejected out of the earth several thousand feet away, having been plucked out of the ground by a giant fiery hand extending out of the surrounding crimson spirit domain. "Did you think you could get away?" Kai Rong chuckled as he raised a hand before pressing it downward forcefully, and the large fiery hand emulated this gesture, forcing the white-robed young man into the ground. Immediately thereafter, Kai Rong pulled a dark red flute out of the chest of his robes. The flute was covered in black spots, giving it the appearance of an old blowpipe. As Kai Rong began to play the flute, an ancient melody rang out, and the sound of buzzing from the Flowing Fire Palace grew louder and louder as thousands upon thousands of Fire Age fireflies were freed from the restriction, then converged upon the white-robed young man. A blood-curdling howl instantly rang out, but Kai Rong paid no further heed to Yan Ziyan and the white-robed young man as he crossed the plaza to the other side. A relatively intact statue of a foreign race being stood on the other side of the plaza. The foreign being's hands and feet were as large as banana leaves, and their hair resembled flames. Their upper body was bared, and a series of strange patterns were etched onto their skin. Kai Rong made his way over to the statue, then extended a deep bow as he said, "Master, please forgive me for coming here of my own accord to claim these Fire Age fireflies. The intruders of our Flowing Fire Palace have already been dealt with." Ali. Around half a month later, an azure figure was flying through the air on a green jade flying carriage above a forest in the true Mantra sect ruins. It was none other than Han Li, having adopted another disguise, and after passing through the Lotus Pond from before, he had only encountered some sporadic sets of ruins. He wasn't met with any more danger, but nor had he found any more treasures. On the flying carriage, he cast his gaze into the distance, and all of a sudden, his brows furrowed slightly, following which the carriage descended toward the ground at his behest. Upon his landing, Han Li stowed the flying carriage away, then made his way down a small bluestone path in the forest, quickly arriving before a giant arched bridge. The bridge was over 300 feet wide and primarily constructed from wood and stone, consisting of a bluestone staircase and a flat carriage path, as well as a gray stone lion placed on either side of the bridge's entrance. Han Li strode forward before raising a hand to stroke one of the stone lions, which was even taller than himself, and he was able to ascertain that they were nothing more than normal stone lions that were completely devoid of spiritual power fluctuations. After a brief hesitation, he made his way onto the bridge, but right as he was about to reach the center of the bridge, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. The bridge had been snapped here, and up ahead was a giant spatial rift that was tens of thousands of feet in length. The spatial rift was filled with nothing but darkness, and there were formidable spatial fluctuations constantly surging out of it. It seemed that the other half of the bridge had been devoured by the spatial rift. Aside from this giant spatial rift, there were also countless smaller rifts around it, and even though they hadn't completely blocked Han Li's path forward, he didn't dare to recklessly pass through them. Han Li peered into the spatial rift, but couldn't see anything in it, and the longer he stared into it, the more an irrational fear of being devoured by the rift began to take root in his heart. He withdrew his gaze before turning his attention to either side of the bridge, upon which he discovered that half of all of the trees and buildings within an area that spanned tens of thousands of feet had been erased. What was left was either standing resiliently like this half-intact bridge, or had completely collapsed, presenting a very strange sight to behold. Looks like I won't be able to keep going forward. With that in mind, Han Li began to make his way down from the bridge, but he had only just raised his foot when the bridge beneath him began to tremble. He instantly swiveled around to discover bursts of fearsome spatial fluctuations surging out of the giant black rift behind him, and the area around it was slowly beginning to expand like a giant mouth, aiming to swallow what remained of the arched bridge. Han Li hurriedly darted forward before descending beside the stone lions, and by the time he turned around again, the commotion had subsided. The spatial rift had expanded slightly, but it seemed to have stabilized itself again. Could it be that the true mantra sect ruins are still in a state of ongoing spatial disintegration? If that were the case, then he would have to proceed with more caution. Right at this moment, a burst of peculiar energy fluctuations suddenly erupted out of the ground beneath the stone lion beside him, immediately following which a black vortex that was over 100 feet in radius emerged without any warning, and it was continuing to expand while releasing tremendous suction force. Han Li hurriedly channeled his mantra treasured axis as he attempted to flee the scene, but he was locked into place by a burst of formidable spatial power, rendering him unable to get away. His expression instantly changed drastically as he hurriedly released his time spirit domain, and a layer of golden scales appeared over his body, as did the suit of dark green armor formed by his Xuanwu bloodline. However, before he had a chance to summon his azure bamboo cloudswarm swords, the burst of suction force became significantly more powerful, and he was sucked into the vortex along with the stone lion. All of a sudden, Han Li felt the ground give way beneath his feet, and he found himself in a dim, black space. The stone lion that had fallen into the spatial rift with Han Li was swept up by a whirlwind that enshrouded in murky gray light, and it was instantly reduced to dust. Han Li knew that he had been sucked into a spatial rift, and he immediately began to carefully inspect his surroundings with his infernal devilish eyes. At the same time, he flipped both hands over at once to summon his profound heavenly gourd, and a sword formed by 9 combined azure bamboo cloudswarm swords. The sound of howling wind was ringing out incessantly from all directions, and everywhere he looked, he could see a series of gray spatial vortexes and spatial rifts of different lengths, giving the surrounding area an extremely unstable appearance. Hovering extremely far away in the distance were landmasses of different sizes, and they seemed to be enveloped within transparent bubbles as they hovered between all of the spatial rifts and vortexes. Some of the landmasses were larger and appeared relatively more stable, while some of the smaller ones were disintegrating at a rate that was discernible even to the naked eye under the compressive and tearing forces exerted by the surrounding spatial rifts. Right at this moment, a deafening boom rang out in the distance, and Han Li hurriedly turned in that direction to discover an enormous gray current sweeping rapidly toward him. The space in its wake was trembling incessantly, and the spatial fluctuations being released by the wave were so formidable that even the surrounding darkness was warping slightly. None of the nearby spatial rifts were able to hold themselves together, and they were all sucked into the wave. That's a spatial storm. Han Li couldn't help but curse his own luck. It was already extremely unfortunate that he had been inexplicably sucked into a spatial rift, and now his woes were being compounded even further. Even with his current physical constitution, he still wouldn't dare to face such formidable spatial power head-on. Not daring to remain where he was any longer, he cast his gaze toward the nearest floating landmass, then channeled his reversal true axis as he sped toward it. Due to the abundance of spatial rifts in the area, Han Li didn't dare to accelerate too much, and he could only move toward the landmass in an extremely wary fashion. After flying for just over 10,000 feet, Han Li took a glance back at the spatial storm, and a grim look instantly appeared on his face. The spatial storm had only been around 100,000 feet in size just a moment ago, yet since then, it had swelled to several times its original size. Even though it wasn't advancing directly toward Han Li as it continued to expand, it was only going to exert more and more influence upon this already unstable space. If he couldn't reach the landmass up ahead before the spatial storm reached him, then he would be sucked into the storm and pulverized. If he were to die here, not only would his remains be completely destroyed, even his nascent soul would be eradicated as well. I have to make a run for it. Han Li gritted his teeth as the time spirit domain around him swelled to several times its original size, and he abruptly sped up significantly, racing through the air as a streak of golden light. As the landmass drew closer and closer, Han Li was able to see the landmarks on it with increasing clarity, and he was even able to catch a whiff of the scent of spirit plants in the air. Right as he was about to reach the edge of the continent, a resounding boom suddenly rang out, and the enormous spatial storm suddenly exploded as a ball of blinding white light appeared within it, which countless blades of gray light erupted forth in all directions. These blades of gray light ranged from only around an inch in length to several thousand feet long, and they were imbued with immeasurable spatial power. Han Li's expression darkened even further upon sensing this, but he had no time to turn around, and he could only continue to rush toward the landmass up ahead as quickly as he could. Right at this moment, he felt a burst of violent spatial fluctuations behind him, and before he had a chance to do anything, several loud explosions rang out behind him as several blades of gray light struck his time spirit domain. The spirit domain didn't even get a chance to exert its slowing effect before it was torn apart by the blades of gray light, and Han Li let loose a desperate roar as he sped toward the landmass with all his might. A loud thump rang out as he crashed into an invisible, yet extremely sturdy spatial barrier, and he was sent flying back from the force of the collision. At this point, it was already too late to make a second dash for the landmass, as there was a blade of gray light that was around 3 feet in length hurtling toward him from behind. In this dire situation, He had no time to think as he placed his profound heavenly gourd behind himself, while making a rapid string of hand seals with his other hand. The gourd began to glow radiantly as a vortex appeared at its opening, and a faint thud rang out as the blade of gray light was sucked into the gourd. A burst of tremendous force surged through the gourd, almost wrenching it out of Han Li's grasp, and he hurriedly tightened his grip around the gourd before darting toward the landmass again. Right at this moment, he suddenly felt a sharp, burning pain in his hand. He looked down to discover that the gourd had become red-hot, resembling a piece of smelted metal, and it was also trembling incessantly, looking as if it could explode at any moment. Han Li immediately stowed his azure bamboo cloud swarm swords away upon seeing this, then thrust his palm firmly into the underside of the profound heavenly gourd. A faint thud rang out as the blade of gray light that had been sucked into the gourd erupted forth before hurtling toward the spatial barrier around the landmass, and a long and thin gash similar to a spatial rift was instantly sliced into the surface of the spatial barrier. The gash was several dozen feet in length, but it was very unstable and looked as if it could disappear at any moment. Han Li knew that this was his only opportunity, so he channeled his reversal true axis ability to its limits, then shot through the gash at an astonishing speed. In the next instant, he began plummeting toward the ground like an asteroid, crashing straight through a mountain and emerging on the other side. From there, he hovered in midair as he looked up at the gash in the spatial barrier, which was slowly closing, and he heaved a long sigh of relief with more than a hint of lingering fear in his eyes. If he had reacted just a little slower, or he didn't have the profound heavenly gourd in his possession, then he would have most likely been in a world of trouble. It seemed that under the tranquil facade of the true mantra sect ruins was an extremely dangerous place, and he had been too complacent up to this point. Moments later, he slowly drifted down onto the ground near a lush tree, then sat down onto a strange-looking rock. He then raised the profound heavenly gourd in his hand, which was still carrying some of its residual heat, but it was no longer as scorching hot as before. Furthermore, its red coloration was slowly fading as it gradually reverted back to its original green color. After inspecting the gourd momentarily with his spiritual sense, he discovered the circulation of spiritual power within it had become a little chaotic, but aside from that, it was completely fine. Hence, he stowed the gourd away, then promptly swallowed a pill before closing his eyes to meditate. Around an hour later, his eyes sprang open, and at this point his aura had settled down again. After rising to his feet, he began to inspect his surroundings, upon which he discovered that there were many more strange rocks like the one that he had been sitting on in the surrounding forest, and they extended all the way into the forest. What is this place? Is it still somewhere within the true mantra sect ruins? After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li began to make his way along the trail of strange rocks. As soon as Han Li emerged from the forest, he immediately stepped into an open area. He inspected his surroundings momentarily before continuing onward, and it didn't take long before he arrived at a rocky forest formed by all types of strange-looking rocks. At the exact center of the rocky forest was a round stone platform that was around 10,000 feet in radius and roughly 1,000 feet tall. It was connected to the mountain below it, and its surface was riddled with cracks and moss, indicating that it was a very old structure. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly upon seeing this, and he felt like this platform was somewhat familiar. After a brief moment of contemplation, he sprang up into the air before landing on the platform. The entire platform was riddled with cracks that were filled with green vines, and the one remarkable thing about the structure was that it was giving off a hint of faint law power fluctuations. Furthermore, there was a giant stone plaque that was around 1,000 feet tall standing on the edge of the platform, and it was also crawling with moss and vines. Only after Han Li drew close to the plaque did he discover that the words Mantra Domain were inscribed upon it in large golden characters beneath the masses of vines. Han Li's brows furrowed slightly as he turned around to inspect his surroundings once more, and a look of realization suddenly appeared on his face. This was the exact same stone platform that he had witnessed Patriarch Myro deliver his lecture from on the translucent wall of light. At the time, he had only heard 8.5 sentences of Patriarch Myro's profound lecture, and that had allowed him to open up 8 immortal acupoints in succession. Unfortunately, he was never able to conjure up that same vision again since then. However, he had now arrived at the site of the lecture in person, seemingly completely by chance, or perhaps fate had guided him here. All of a sudden, Han Li made a hand seal, and his mantra-treasured axis emerged behind him, then began to revolve on the spot. In the next instant, he rose up into the sky and stood in midair. The wall of translucent light had restricted his field of view, preventing him from seeing the entirety of the stone platform, but he was able to see everything from this vantage point. He made a hand seal as he chanted an incantation, and all of the time Tao runes on his mantra-treasured axis lit up in unison. The eye of truth at the center of the axis also sprang open, and a beam of golden light erupted out of the giant eyeball before shining down upon the stone platform. Basked within the golden light, the stone platform also began to glow faintly with a golden hue, and a series of familiar figures began to take shape. I knew it. He turned his gaze to the yellow-robed tree being by the name of Moguang, then to the large-headed child that he had seen earlier in the water divination palace. One after another, his gaze roamed over the people seated on the stone platform before finally settling on the rotund monk that was Patriarch Myro. He wore a benevolent expression as he sat in a casual manner with his legs crossed, gently massaging a string of green jade Buddhist prayer beads as he delivered his lecture. Whenever he opened his mouth, a string of 5-colored runes would emerge from within, then rise up into the sky as a burst of 5-colored light to resonate with heaven and earth and conjure up all types of phenomena. Even though this was already Han Li's second time witnessing this scene, he was still stunned by what he saw. However, in contrast with last time, everything that was unfolding was merely a projection that was being restored by the eye of truth, and it wasn't happening in real time. Hence, he wasn't able to glean the same profound insights as before. He watched as all types of phenomena emerged one after another, and as he did so, a hint of befuddlement welled up in his heart. Even with his unfathomable powers, Patriarch Myro was still unable to prevent his own death, nor the destruction of the true mantra sect. In that case, just how powerful was the Time Tao ancestor that had laid waste to the true mantra sect? Moments later, Moguang raised a question, and Patriarch Myro offered a response, to which all 5 of his disciples reacted with enlightenment and gratitude. Patriarch Myro continued his lecture, but all of a sudden, he stopped as a surprised look appeared on his face, and he turned his gaze to a certain direction. Han Li turned his gaze in that direction, but didn't see anything there. Right as he was wondering what Patriarch Myro had just reacted to, his 5 disciples also snapped back to their senses before turning to the same direction, and Moguang sprang to his feet as he said something in a loud, questioning voice with an angry look on his face. Only then did Han Li realize that this was the scene where he had been caught eavesdropping on Patriarch Myro's lecture. A wry smile appeared on his face as he turned his gaze back to Patriarch Myro, and he spotted a fat rat seated on the cushion that Moguang had just gotten up from. It was standing upright on its hind legs, and it was also looking in the same direction as everyone else. It immediately occurred to Han Li that this rat was identical to the giant green rat that he had seen in that abyss in the primordial land, except this one was far smaller. Right at this moment, Mu Yan returned to his seat, flicking the fat rat on the head to send it tumbling several thousand feet away. As soon as the rat got up, it immediately rushed over to Patriarch Myro's side, where it sat down right beside him with its legs crossed, much like a human would. Patriarch Myro took a glance down at the rat and made no attempt to chase it away as he continued his lecture. Mu Yan also made no further effort to chase the wraith away upon seeing this. Even though Han Li wasn't able to benefit from this vision as he did last time, he still observed carefully as Patriarch Myro answered his disciples' questions, memorizing all of the gestures made by Patriarch Myro and his disciples. Sometime later, as Patriarch Myro's lecture drew to a close, a warm smile appeared on his face, and his gaze roamed over his disciples one after another as he waved a hand to dismiss them. A stunned look appeared on Han Li's face as he stared at Patriarch Myro. Just now, he felt as if Patriarch Myro's gaze had settled on him for a brief moment. It was only for a split second, but it was a very profound feeling, as if there were some deeper meaning to that look from Patriarch Myro. Could it be that not only had Patriarch Myro noticed him eavesdropping on his lecture, he had also discovered the current Han Li, who was reliving this scene through his eye of truth? After some contemplation, Han Li felt like this wasn't very plausible, and he shook his head with a wry smile, feeling as if he were overthinking the situation. Even after all of the disciples and the fat rat had departed, Patriarch Myro remained seated in silence for a while, then stowed his prayer beads away before slowly rising to his feet. He then shuffled over the stone wall with the words, "Mantra Domain," inscribed upon it, and he observed it in silence for a moment before suddenly raising a hand to point at one of the golden characters. A beam of golden light shot out of his fingertip before vanishing into that character in a flash, and after that, he clasped his hands behind his back as he looked up at the sky. His body began to blur, as if he were integrating himself into heaven and earth, and before long, he had vanished altogether. For some reason, Han Li was struck by a sense of loneliness at the sight of Patriarch Myro's rotund figure, and he was left in a daze for a long while. After the scene had played out in full, Han Li withdrew his mantra-treasured axis, then flew over to the stone plaque. With a sweep of his sleeve, he conjured up a gust of wind that cleared the moss and vines from the surface of the plaque to reveal the character that Patriarch Myro had been pointing at in the scene from earlier. Immediately thereafter, Han Li carefully gazed upon that character with his infernal devilish eyes, and sure enough, there was a layer of faint golden light glimmering at the topmost tip of the character, indicating that it was harboring some type of secret. Han Li reached out with his right hand, and he was able to pierce his index and middle fingers into the stone wall with ease, before slowly pulling out an azure bamboo slip from within. He then channeled his immortal spiritual power to refine the bamboo slip before injecting his spiritual sense into it, and moments later, his eyes abruptly sprang open as an ecstatic look appeared on his face. As it turned out, the bamboo slip contained the 9 levels of the mantra axis scripture, as well as a strange text titled Sumeru Insights. The mantra axis scripture was naturally very familiar to him, and he quickly read through the entire scripture to find that some of the passages were a little different from what he had seen in the past. However, these differences were very minute, so they had no significant bearing and certainly wouldn't lead to chi deviation. Furthermore, enclosed within the scripture was a detailed account of the mantra domain ability that he had already obtained from Mu Yan, and in this case, there were also some minor, insignificant differences. As for the Sumeru Insights text, that was completely unintelligible to Han Li. It only consisted of several thousand words, but the contents were very difficult to understand, and it didn't seem like a cultivation art, nor did it appear to be any type of secret technique. Han Li spent a long time reading through the text, but to no avail, so he could only give up for now. After that, he carefully examined the 9 levels of the mantra axis scripture once more, and he suppressed the elation in his heart, as well as the urge to begin cultivating on the spot, as he flew over to the stone plaque again. There he gazed upon the mantra domain, inscribed on the stone wall, then extended a deep and respectful bow toward the long-gone figure before flying down the mountain. It didn't take long for Han Li to reach the foot of the mountain, and it seemed that he had arrived in a huge valley with a relatively flat and level terrain. There were numerous tall buildings standing in the valley, and its layout was rather similar to that of the water divination palace from before. However, these buildings were primarily golden in color, and even though most of them were damaged, they were still glowing radiantly. Han Li began to search through the valley, and before long, close to half a day had passed by. During this time, he had searched through most of the valley, but wasn't able to find much of use aside from some spirit medicines. Hence, he continued deeper into the valley, and he had only flown a few hundred kilometers when a hint of elation suddenly appeared on his face. He could sense another burst of time law power fluctuations, a few hundred kilometers up ahead. He immediately flew in that direction without any hesitation, but at the same time, he made sure to keep constant tabs on his surroundings with his spiritual sense. Shortly thereafter, he was able to find the origins of the burst of time law power fluctuations, and he found himself standing in front of a golden palace. The palace was constructed beside a mountain, and it was several thousand feet tall, taking up an area in excess of 1,000 acres. It was entirely constructed out of some type of jade material that was plated in a layer of golden material, giving it a shimmering golden appearance. There were many signs of battle around the palace, and holes had even been punched through some places. Beams of golden light were shining through these holes, giving off formidable time law power fluctuations. A hint of elation appeared on Han Li's face at the sight of the golden palace, and he carefully released his spiritual sense to scour the area around the building. Only after ensuring that there was no danger did he slowly make his way over to the shut gate of the palace, and he laid a palm flat against the gate before giving it a firm push. The gate flashed momentarily with golden light, then swung open, much to Han Li's surprise. A burst of blinding golden light instantly erupted out of the palace, and it was as if there were a golden sun trapped inside. Instead of immediately stepping into the palace, Han Li first used his spiritual sense to inspect its interior. However, his spiritual sense had only just extended into the palace when it was stopped in its tracks by a burst of gentle yet resilient force, preventing it from advancing any further. Hence, Han Li had to turn to his infernal devilish eyes, but he soon discovered that his infernal devilish eyes were also unable to see through the burst of gentle force within the palace. All he could see were several indistinct shadows, but he couldn't make out exactly what they were. After a brief moment of contemplation, Han Li stepped into the palace, and as soon as he did so, his vision immediately blurred, and he felt as if he had entered another space. Immediately thereafter, a burst of tremendous force enveloped him from all directions, making it impossible for him to even lift a finger. Thankfully, his vision hadn't faded, and he hurriedly cast his gaze forward in an alarmed manner. The entire palace was filled with waves of golden light that were rippling like water while giving off bursts of formidable and profound time law powers, and it was precisely these time law powers that had immobilized Han Li. In addition to Han Li, there were several dozen more cultivators split up into 2 factions in the palace, and judging from their attire, it was apparent that one side consisted of heavenly court cultivators, while the other consisted of true mantra sect disciples. In contrast with the bodies outside, these people still appeared very much alive, and they were still locked in poses that suggested that they were engaged in battle, with all type of treasures hovering around them. Han Li was unable to detect their cultivation bases, but judging from the visual clues that he was able to gather, he speculated that most of them were true immortals, while the leader of each group were golden immortals. At this moment, all of them were completely still, as if they had been frozen in time, presenting a very peculiar sight to behold. Han Li was astonished to see this. It was clear that this had something to do with the burst of time law power fluctuations in the palace, and they seemed to have a similar effect to that of his mantra-treasured axis, except his mantra-treasured axis was only able to slow the flow of time, while time seemed to have completely stopped here. These cultivators had most likely already been trapped here and immobilized for countless years. Han Li was stunned by what he was seeing, but he quickly gathered himself as an important question sprang into his mind. Now that he had stumbled into this place, how was he going to get out? His physical strength was clearly insufficient to struggle free from the restrictive effects of the time law powers here, and the only thing that he could take solace in was that his immortal spirit power and time law powers hadn't also been restricted. Instead, they were able to circulate at a very slow speed. Perhaps this had something to do with the fact that he was using a time attribute cultivation art. With that in mind, Han Li immediately attempted to channel the immortal spiritual power with all his might, and a speck of golden light emerged over his body, then slowly expanded to completely inundate him. This would have only taken him an instant under normal circumstances, but the same maneuver took him several hours to complete here. Han Li remained patient as he continued to circulate his immortal spiritual power, while also using his own time law powers to ward off the effects of the external time law powers as much as possible. After what seemed like an eternity, his mantra-treasured axis finally appeared behind him, following which he was able to unleash his reversal true axis ability. The flow of time within his body began to speed up as a result, slowing counteracting the restrictive forces around him. His body was still immobilized, but his immortal spiritual power and time law powers were beginning to circulate a little faster. This came as quite a relief to Han Li, but he still didn't dare to let down his guard as he continued to channel his reversal true axis with all his might. As the mantra-treasured axis revolved in reverse faster and faster, the restrictive forces around him quickly lessened, and over an hour later, the mantra-treasured axis had picked up so much speed that it had transformed into a blurry golden disk. An elated look flashed through Han Li's eyes as he was finally able to slowly raise an arm. However, even with his reversal true axis ability activated to its limits, he was still unable to ward off the surrounding restrictive forces. Thankfully, the entrance of the palace was just nearby, so he wouldn't have to move far to leave. With his mobility restored, Han Li was feeling much more reassured, and he began to inspect his surroundings again. His gaze fell upon the two nearby groups of cultivators, and he began to make his way toward them in an extremely slow and sluggish fashion. All of them were still carrying their storage tools, and the treasures hovering around them also appeared to be quite powerful. Han Li strode over to these cultivators before stowing away their storage tools, and the treasures floating in the air around them, one by one. After that, he began to make his way toward the other parts of the hall. These storage tools and treasures made for a nice haul, but they weren't all that appealing to him. Instead, what he was far more interested in was finding out why time had come to a stop here, and that was why he hadn't left the palace right away. Unfortunately, with his spiritual sense completely impeded here, he could only inspect the palace with his eyes. The palace wasn't very large, and it didn't appear to be remarkable in any way. At the deepest part of the palace was a stone platform that resembled an altar, and it had already mostly collapsed. Han Li quickly examined the rest of the palace, but didn't find anything worthy of note. He turned his gaze to the collapsed altar, then made his way up the steps leading up to it. As soon as he set foot on the stone platform, Han Li immediately felt a burst of incredibly potent time law power fluctuations. His eyes immediately lit up, and he knew that he had found the source of this time-stopping effect. He really wanted to speed up, but the time law power fluctuations up ahead only became more and more potent, so he was slowing down further and further instead. Fortunately, he wasn't immobilized again. It took Han Li half a day to finally step onto the small altar, and at the center of it was a bottomless hole that seemed to have resulted from some type of attack. Within the hole was a ball of radiant golden light that was giving off tremendous time law power fluctuations, and that was the reason why time had fallen still in this palace. The ball of golden light didn't contain any time attribute immortal treasure or anything like that. Instead, it seemed to be some residual power left behind by some type of attack. Han Li raised his head to discover that there was a large hole in the ceiling of the palace as well, and its angle was identical to that of the hole in the ground. A stunned look appeared on Han Li's face upon making this discovery. Just the residual power from whatever attack had been unleashed was enough to bring time in the palace to a complete standstill for so many years. Han Li couldn't even begin to fathom just how powerful the one who unleashed the attack had to have been. Could it have been the Time Dao ancestor? The Eye of Truth slowly appeared at the center of the mantra-treasured axis, and a beam of golden light shot out of the eye and into the hole. A burst of bright golden light appeared within the hole, and the ball of golden light began to rapidly change form, reverting back into a golden finger projection that was several feet in length before flying back up into the sky. The broken altar also quickly reverted back to its complete form, but Han Li paid no heed to it as his gaze was focused solely on the golden finger projection. Bursts of golden light were flashing over the finger projection, and upon closer inspection, Han Li discovered that the finger projection was formed by numerous time law threads intertwined together in an extremely profound fashion. The finger projection seemed to be able to pierce through all things, and Han Li was struck by a sense of vulnerability just from looking at it. Ever since his arrival in the true immortal realm, he had been constantly working hard in his cultivation, and he was now able to wield the power of time laws. But in contrast with this golden finger projection, his mastery of time law powers was downright abysmal. All of a sudden, a thought occurred to Han Li. Back in the water divination palace, the large-headed child had bestowed upon him some memories containing his cultivation, insights in addition to the water divination time arts. In those memories, the term law abilities was brought up, but no explanation of exactly what this concept was had been provided. At the time, Han Li had only memorized all of this information in the hope that it would be useful to him in the future, and it seemed that perhaps it had something to do with this. Could it be that this golden finger projection is a type of law ability? However, he didn't dwell on this train of thought for long as he began staring intently at the golden finger projection, carefully observing the time law power permutations and distribution of time law threads within it. The profound permutations in the time law powers were extremely mesmerizing to behold, and he quickly found himself completely immersed, as if he were looking at a piece of unmatched artwork. The finger projection flew back upward, and it quickly vanished through the large hole in the ceiling. Han Li immediately closed his Eye of Truth upon seeing this, then closed his own eyes as he carefully recalled the incredibly profound sight that he had just witnessed. A long while later, his Eye of Truth sprang open again at his behest, and a beam of golden light shot out of it and into the hole. Once again, the same golden finger projection appeared, and Han Li was able to observe it for a second time. He repeated this process over and over again, and in doing so, he was able to slowly glean a great deal of insight into the golden finger projection. But at the same time, he discovered that there were only more and more things that he didn't understand. However, he had already memorized all of the time law power permutations within the golden finger projection, so he would be able to continue studying it once he left this place. At this point, not only was he utterly exhausted, he had also gained as much insight as he could into the golden finger projection, so there was no point in continuing this exercise any further. With that in mind, he cast his gaze into the hole up ahead, and the ball of golden light inside was still flashing incessantly. With his reversal true axis ability channeled to its maximal extent, he quickly recovered his mobility, then raised an arm as a burst of bright golden light that was interspersed with 10-time law threads appeared over the palm of his hand. He then made a grabbing motion, and the golden light and time law threads instantly transformed into a large golden hand that grabbed onto the ball of golden light before pulling it upward. However, the ball of golden light seemed to be completely rooted to the spot, refusing to budge. Han Li's expression changed slightly seeing this, and he took a deep breath, following which 16 additional time law threads appeared within the large golden hand. The hand instantly swelled to around twice its original size, and the time law power fluctuations emanating from it were significantly enhanced. Even so, the ball of golden light still appeared to be completely unmovable. A hint of surprise appeared on Han Li's face as he withdrew the golden hand, and after a brief moment of contemplation, he raised his hand once again, this time to summon his profound heavenly gourd. A dull thump then rang out, as a beam of green light shot out of the gourd before hurtling directly toward the ball of golden light. However, the beam of green light had only just shot out of the area encompassed within the reversal true axis, when it was instantly stopped in its tracks by the surrounding time law powers. Han Li slowly crouched down upon seeing this, extending his hand into the hole on the ground, and only then was the beam of green light able to make contact with the ball of golden light inside. The beam of green light then attempted to drag the ball of golden light into the profound heavenly gourd, but despite its best efforts, the ball of golden light remained completely still on the spot. Han Li's expression darkened slightly upon seeing this, and he stowed his profound heavenly gourd away before unleashing another secret technique. Some time later, Han Li stopped what he was doing as a resigned look appeared on his face. He had already tried everything that he could think of, but the ball of golden light simply refused to budge. A conflicted look appeared on his face as he gazed upon the ball of golden light inside the hole. Was he really just going to have to leave something so precious behind? He simply couldn't bring himself to give up. The ball of golden light contained more time law powers than his golden lock and his golden flag combined, and that wasn't even taking into account all of the profound complexities that it also harbored. If he could secure it, then it would undoubtedly be very useful to him. All of a sudden, a thought sprang into Han Li's mind, and he immediately made a hand seal, upon which a burst of radiant golden light erupted out of his mantra-treasured axis. At the same time, the golden light in front of him converged to form the clear time vial. Han Li then switched to a different hand seal, and the golden light around his body swept through the surrounding area before forming countless grains of golden sand. The three bursts of time law powers intertwined to form a golden vortex that was revolving rapidly, and the vortex then began to compress inward at his behest. A burst of incredibly formidable time law powers flashed past, and the golden vortex transformed into a revolving golden ring. At this point, Han Li was able to conjure up this golden ring using his 3 time attribute cultivation arts with relative ease. Go! Han Li thrust his palm forward, and the golden ring immediately shot forth before making contact with the ball of golden light. The golden ring then began to revolve rapidly while giving off dazzling golden light, easily outshining the pervasive golden light that filled the entire palace. At the same time, a burst of tremendous suction force erupted out of the golden ring to envelop the ball of golden light. Finally, the surface of the ball of golden light began to ripple slightly, and this was the first sign of wavering that it had displayed thus far. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up upon seeing this. Several strands of golden light rose up reluctantly from the ball of golden light, then vanished into the golden ring. The ball of golden light seemed to be trying to resist, but to no avail. At the same time, the golden ring was glowing brighter and brighter, and more golden light was drawn upward before being sucked into the golden ring. Moments later, the golden ring shuddered as it released a strand of golden light, which vanished into Han Li's body in a flash before appearing on the mantra-treasured axis. Han Li was ecstatic to see this, and he continued to inject more power into the golden ring. The suction force released by the golden ring became stronger and stronger, and more golden light was sucked out of the ball of light before vanishing into the golden ring, only to then transform into time law threads. The ball of golden light was rapidly shrinking at a rate that was discernible even to the naked eye, and it didn't take long before it disappeared entirely. In the instant that the ball of golden light vanished, all of the golden light within the palace rippled slightly before fading away. The restrictive time law powers within the palace also vanished, and for the first time in countless years, the flow of time was restored to normal. Immediately thereafter, a string of dull thumps rang out as the heavenly court cultivators and true mantra sect disciples fell out of the air before crumpling to the ground. A surprised look appeared on Han Li's face upon seeing this, and he withdrew the golden ring before making his way over to the cultivators that had crumpled to the ground, only to discover that they were all dead. How did this happen? They looked very much alive just a moment ago. The bodies were entirely unharmed, and the nascent souls were still present within them, but their souls had completely vanished without a trace. Han Li swept his spiritual sense carefully over the bodies, and he quickly noticed something. As it turned out, there was an extremely faint time law aura left behind in the mind of the body closest to him, and if it weren't for his tremendous spiritual sense and the fact that he had cultivated the laws of time, there was no way that he would have been able to detect it. The time law aura was imbued with a burst of extremely aggressive intent, similar to that of the golden finger projection, and it was clearly this aggressive finger intent that had destroyed this person's soul. Han Li then examined all of the other bodies to find that they had suffered the same fate. So not only does that golden finger projection possess tremendous penetrative power, it can also attack one's soul. With that in mind, Han Li was only becoming more intrigued by the golden finger projection. After determining the cause of death of these cultivators, Han Li captured the nascent souls of the two golden immortals in the palace, then paid no further heed to the bodies as he turned his gaze to the mantra-treasured axis behind him. At this point, there were as many as 39 time law threads around it. By refining that ball of golden light, Han Li had earned himself 13 time law threads. However, all of the profound time law power permutations within the ball of golden light had been erased after it was converted into time law threads, and that was a little disappointing to Han Li. But having already gained 13 time law threads, it would have simply been excessively greedy to ask for anything more. After that, Han Li searched through the palace one more time, but wasn't able to find anything else of use. After departing from the palace, Han Li continued to make his way deeper into the valley. Before long, he reached the end of the valley without encountering any more buildings, and he flew out of the valley to continue his search. While flying through the air, Han Li summoned a series of storage tools before injecting his spiritual sense into them, one after another. These storage tools were the ones that he had just obtained from the true mantra sect disciples. He hadn't taken the storage tools because the treasures inside appealed to him. Instead, he wanted to find out more information about the true mantra sect for risk mitigation purposes, as well as to aid him in his search for more treasures. It hadn't been very long since he entered these ruins, but he had obtained both the water divination time arts and the mantra axis scripture. On top of that, he had also acquired that golden flag, the blue shield, 13 additional time law threads and dozens of storage tools, amounting to an incredible haul. He was very much looking forward to seeing what else he could find in these ruins, and he didn't really care about his reincarnation palace anymore. Even in the worst-case scenario, he would just have to fail the mission and submit the 50,000 immortal origin stones instead. It didn't take long before Han Li had checked through all of the storage tools, but to his dismay, none of them contained any useful information pertaining to the true mantra sect. Han Li stowed the storage tools away, then began examining the storage tools of the heavenly court cultivators as well. And a jade slip emerged in his grasp amid a flash of white light. It was a map of the true mantra sect that he had found from the storage tool, belonging to the heavenly court golden immortal. He didn't really have much high hopes for the storage tools of the heavenly court cultivators, so this was certainly a pleasant surprise. That golden immortal had most likely obtained this map through whatever means in the hope that he would be able to scour the true mantra sect for treasures during the heavenly court invasion. And now, the map was going to benefit Han Li countless years later. Han Li drew to a halt, then descended onto a mountain and injected his spiritual sense into the jade slip. Perhaps the map had been made in a hurry, but it was quite crude, only marking out the main landmarks and areas of the true mantra sect. According to the map, the true mantra sect had been far more massive than the Blaze Dragon Dao, and it was split up into 5 areas, namely water divination, true mantra, flowing fire, earth dawn, and wood emperor. Every single one of those areas was several times the size of the Blaze Dragon Dao, and the true mantra area was situated at the center, while the other 4 areas were located in the north, south, east, and west. The water divination palace was most likely in the water divination area, while I currently appear to be in the true mantra area. After stowing the jade slip away, Han Li rose up into the air to inspect his surroundings. There was some white mist in the air here, but it was far thinner than in the water divination area, so Han Li was able to enjoy much better visibility with his infernal devilish eyes. Down below is a rather unremarkable mountain range with no standout features, and the map was too crude, so it was impossible for Han Li to determine exactly where he currently was in the true mantra area. However, he remained unfazed as he continued onward. It was already a great development that he had a rough map of the true mantra sect ruins. At the very least, he wouldn't be stumbling around completely blind anymore. Furthermore, some of the important locations in the 5 areas had been labeled on the map, so as long as he could ascertain his approximate location, he should be able to follow the map to the important landmarks in the sect. Around a week flew by in a flash. On this day, a streak of azure light shot forth from afar before descending onto a mountain. The azure light faded to reveal Han Li, and on the way here, he had made some more useful discoveries. Judging from what he had seen in the past few days, Han Li had become even more convinced that he was in a fragmented section of the true mantra area. Unfortunately, he still hadn't been able to ascertain exactly where he was on the map. At this moment, Han Li was looking a little wary, and he took a pill before resting for a moment, then quickly continued onward. After flying for a while longer, his expression suddenly changed slightly as he darted to the side. There was a spatial rift that was over 100 feet in length hanging in the air up ahead, and he carefully skirted around the rift before continuing. He had almost lost his life after unwittingly falling into that spatial rift, so he was making sure to proceed with extra caution. It didn't take long before another spatial rift appeared up ahead, and there were also bursts of spatial fluctuations surging through the air. A thought occurred to Han Li as he raised an eyebrow, and he carefully flew forward before descending in front of a cliff. This was the end of the landmass that he was situated on. Ahead of the cliff was a vast expanse of nothingness that was filled with countless spatial rifts of different sizes, resembling sets of all-devouring mouths. Further away in the distance was a giant translucent light barrier that connected heaven and earth, and it was the spatial barrier that he had encountered earlier. Outside the barrier were countless chaotic spatial currents, but Han Li paid no heed to the spatial turbulence and spatial rifts as he cast his gaze even further into the distance. There he could see another spatial barrier, beyond which was what appeared to be a corner of another landmass. Even through the spatial turbulence and spatial barriers, he could still detect hints of spatial fluctuations emanating from that landmass. A hesitant look appeared on his face as he peered into the raging spatial turbulence, but he quickly made a decision as he summoned a pair of treasures, one golden and one blue. These were the two time attribute immortal treasures that he had obtained earlier, and at this point, he had been able to mostly refine them. He began to chant an incantation, and waves of rippling blue light emerged from the blue shield to encompass his entire body, while the golden flag also swelled to several times its original size. Countless specks of golden light surged out of the flag, then rapidly revolved around his body, forming a glittering river of golden light that presented a spectacular sight to behold. Han Li took a glance at the pair of immortal treasures around him, then gave a pleased nod as he flew straight into the space up ahead. The space here was extremely unstable, and the area was rife with spatial rifts. The spatial rifts weren't moving like the ones in the spatial storm from earlier, but that certainly didn't mean that they were stable. Han Li activated his infernal devilish eyes to their limits as he carefully traversed through the space between the spatial rifts, and he was able to make decently fast progress. Before long, he arrived at the spatial barrier, then swept a sleeve through the air to release a streak of azure swordlight that struck the barrier in a flash, and the streak of azure swordlight instantly shattered before being repelled back as an azure flying sword. As for the spatial barrier, it only shuddered slightly before reverting back to normal. Han Li was rather surprised to see this, and he stowed his flying sword away before extending a finger forward. Bright golden light appeared over his body as 36-time law threads emerged before converging toward his finger in unison, and an indistinct golden finger projection shot forth toward the spatial barrier. Not only was the finger projection formed by 36-time law threads, it was also imbued with bursts of time law powers. It was the best attempt that Han Li could currently muster up at replicating the finger projection that he had seen, but it was still very far from the real thing. The finger projection unleashed by Han Li was very indistinct, and it possessed nowhere near the power of the finger projection from the palace, but it was still far more formidable than the sword strike that he had just unleashed. A faint thud rang out as his finger tore through the spatial barrier like a sheet of paper, and an elated look appeared on his face as he lowered his arm while murmuring to himself, "Not bad. I think I'll call this the heaven-piercing finger." After that, he flew out into the spatial turbulence from the large hole in the spatial barrier. As soon as he did this, he was immediately buffeted by a gust of ferocious gray wind from the side, but he was already prepared for this, and summoned a pair of protective immortal treasures to help him weather the storm. At the same time, the river of golden light swirling around his body swelled drastically in size, and instantly overcame the gust of gray wind. As it turned out, the golden flag was a very rare immortal treasure that possessed both defensive and offensive capabilities. After vanquishing the gust of gray wind, Han Li continued onward without pause, quickly flying toward the other landmass in the distance. Gusts of fierce wind were howling in all directions alongside glacial currents and even waves of fire, as well as countless spatial vortexes and spatial rifts. This spatial storm was significantly more formidable than the last one he had encountered, and he was feeling rather perplexed to see this. Ever since he entered the True Mantra sect ruins, he had encountered 3 spatial storms, with each successive one more powerful than the other. Han Li channeled the river of golden light around him to ward off the oncoming waves of spatial turbulence as he forged ahead as quickly as he could. The spatial turbulence by itself wasn't a cause for concern, but the spatial rifts carried by the spatial turbulence were extremely powerful and contained immense spatial power. Even the river of golden light around Han Li struggled to contend with them, so Han Li was forced to repel them through other means, and as a result, his progress was very slow. Thankfully, the 2 landmasses weren't very far apart, and it didn't take long before most of the distance was covered. Right at this moment, what sounded like a furious draconic roar rang out, and Han Li turned to the source of the sound, upon which his expression instantly changed drastically. As it turned out, an enormous white storm was hurtling toward him, tearing through the surrounding spatial turbulence with ease, and it was yet another spatial storm. This spatial storm was even more formidable than the one that Han Li had encountered after being sucked into that spatial rift, and it was filled with blades of white light that were imbued with violent spatial power, capable of shredding through everything in their path. The spatial storm was extremely fast, and it reached Han Li in the blink of an eye before swallowing him up.